Welcome back to the Shot by Shot podcast. I'm joined by my co-hosts Ryan, Oscar, and today we have Seth's Films Reviews coming on. Seth is a co-host of the Real Talk podcast. His Discord is where actually all of us met. Unfortunately, Will can't be with us today, but let's welcome Seth on. So today we're going to be talking about David Lynch, who is one of the best filmmakers who's still alive today, and one of the true art filmmakers working in America of the Hollywood system. And yeah, we have so much to break down. We're going to get the whole filmography, go with our rankings along the way. But Seth, why don't you start us off? What are your thoughts, just initial opening thoughts on David Lynch as an artist, and why are his films special to you?
Yeah, so thanks for having me on. David Lynch is similar to many people, one of my favorite filmmakers probably ever. Primarily for the fact I love how ambiguous his work is. I love how creative his work is. And I think Lynch is similar to, I'm trying to think of an Ari Aster or Wes Anderson, in that he makes films for him and he doesn't really care about what you think about them, whether you like his artistic style or not. He creates these ambiguous mysteries and these thrilling moments, and he also excels in different areas by bringing his surreal elements. And I think with me, I love weird shit, and you're not going to get much weirder than Lynch when it comes to cinema in general. And I think he just makes the most bizarre stuff. And I think you could just, I don't know if we'll discuss it, but even if you watch his shorts and stuff like that as well, they're just as strange in his work and when he was a student, when he was a kid. And I also think he's had a really interesting life. David Lynch, I mean, right now he's in like my kind of probably top 5 filmmakers ever, I would say, or among that pack, so very, very high. Although there is one big omission I still have from his filmography, which I'm sure we'll get into, or several big omissions because they are part of the same universe. But yeah, he's definitely one of my favorites, 100%.
Yeah, his shorts are mental. I was watching them earlier, and it's just really cool to see like where he started from. But yeah,
Which
he's
ones did you
definitely
watch? Which shorts?
the first one he done with the men being sick. His very
Oh,
first one,
yeah. Yeah.
and then the alphabet one, that was actually pretty scary.
Have you watched The Grandmother yet? There's like
No, I
70s.
didn't get to that one.
That's crazy. It's
Yeah.
crazy. But there's some really interesting stuff, definitely.
Hmm. Yeah, he's definitely one of our favorite directors as well. Like over the last 2 years, I've really come to really love his filmography. He's probably top 5 for me as well. Yeah. He just has that style that you don't find anywhere else. Just an incredibly well balanced director. Managed to make some of the greatest movies of all time, in my opinion. Spanning over multiple genres, and even Twin Peaks as well. Now that I've finished that, it's one of the best shows of all time as well. So he's done like anything from like drama, romance, comedy, all the way to like terrifying thrillers and horrors. And all of his films have so many genres mixed into them as well, which is I really love about that. Yeah, and what I really love about him is just his constant incorporation of horror into his like work. Like he isn't a horror director, but at the same time he is one of kind of like the masters of horror in my mind. Like he perfectly implements it and like provides some of the most terrifying scenes I've ever seen. And he creates worlds that are really similar to us, but they're really different, but also quite similar. So they feel very disturbing still. And I think that's just something that I really love about him personally. Yeah, and he's despite the fact that he is like just a great mind in filmmaking, like he's just such an hilarious guy as well. Like in his interviews and everything, he's like a Jimmy Stewart like character, like brought to life. I feel like he was a director, and he just seems like the sweetest guy to talk to in real life. But yeah, I just love him. He's one of my favorite directors of all time.
Yeah, so for me, Lynch and I have had a very interesting relationship. A year ago, I think was when I watched my first Lynch thing. I liked it. I didn't love it, but as kind of time's gone on, I think then watched Blue Velvet like the start of this year, and then I moved on to Lost Highway. I think kind of sparked for me that's kind of change in kind of the way that I his films. Just more and more and more, and I would honestly come to shock a lot of people, but I think as soon as I finished Twin Peaks, I was like, I think this is my favorite director. And then I kind of like before that I was just revisiting all of the films, and I just kept doing them, and you just find more and more every time. But yeah, like you guys have said, it's this surrealistic been my kind of fall in love with Seth's shit as well. It's so good to watch, and his horror is terrifying, but he doesn't try to be a horror director. He just does stuff for himself, and he just makes films, and it's just incredible to see. And even across like Twin Peaks: The Return, which is kind of the closest we've seen him to making something kind of more modern in his style. But you just hear every now and again the rumors that, oh, he's filming something, oh, the rumors flying here and there, but nothing quite landing at the moment. But yeah, probably my favorite director ever is just his films are so good as well. Yeah, back to you, Alex.
Yeah, I think we talk about the spectrum of filmmaking philosophies, where on one end you have what's rooted in the theater with like more script and performance based, and then on the other end we're rooted in kind of the silent film traditions of music and picture. And I'm very much on the music and picture side in terms of what I prefer. And David Lynch is absolutely very far on that side of in terms of his philosophy. He's very much about letting the images speak for themselves and elevating that through his sound design and music, rather than always addressing everything through talking and exposition. But I also think that he's one of the most misunderstood artists, because I feel like now we have this thing where anytime people see a film that's kind of abstract and they don't really get it, it's just associated with, oh, like you'll see it on Letterboxd. Like if David Lynch directed this, everyone would praise it, or it's like a David Lynch movie. And I think that shows how little a lot of people really understand David Lynch, because it's we all know that not everyone likes surrealist movies and movies that are kind of more abstract and dreamlike. And I think why David Lynch is able to, I guess you could say, get away with that is because he has this mindset that everyone is a detective and wants to figure things out. And his films are certainly made for curious people, where it's all about curiosity. And he's so good at making you want to rewatch his films, and even if it's abstract and you don't get it, he makes you want to figure it out and really activates the detective side of your brain, where all of his films are very much like a puzzle, where I don't think people should go on YouTube and watch like David Lynch explain videos, or Blue Velvet, Lost Highway explained. I think a lot of the fun in them is really when you don't get them, and rewatching it and kind of putting the dots together yourself and really activating that detective side of your brain and trying to figure it out, and kind of just come up with your own interpretation rather than see how it spoke to other people, which is why if you ever hear him in interviews, he never speaks on what the meaning of his work is. And he's one of those artists where you see a lot of different themes throughout all of his work, with some of them being he always has curtains a lot of the time, and that also adds to curiosity, where in pretty much all of his films you'll see curtains in some scene or some part of the film. He likes also to move into things, like you see it a lot in Eraserhead, where like moving inside of objects, like the cube in Mulholland Drive, or the mask in The Elephant Man, the ear in Blue Velvet, and constantly just moving inside of things that are normally dark, but then also having people emerge out of darkness, such as Sandy in Blue Velvet or Fred in Lost Highway. He also likes this to have two women, one blonde, one brunette, and often kind of representing two sides of this kind of duality, which we see in Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, Blue Velvet. And also he likes to kind of have road lines have us be guided by the lines of a street, which we see in Wild at Heart, Lost Highway. And I just like seeing directors who play around with some of the same themes and ideas in their work. And even though there's such a wide spectrum of feelings and genres that David Lynch has explored, there's still always his Lynchian signature on really everything he does, which is, like I said, he's one of the true artists who's been able to really achieve mainstream success in America, which is great to see. And I wish that, we could see more like him over here. But let's get right into the filmography. So starting off with Eraserhead, a film which actually took him 5 years to make, and it was his student film project in AFI. So, Seth, what are your thoughts on Eraserhead, David Lynch's debut film?
Yeah, so I'm a big Eraserhead guy. Back on what you said about him being misunderstood, I think, as a filmmaker. What is that noise, by the way? Is anyone else hearing that? Is it my side?
I think it was Oscar, but I'm not sure.
I had a really loud noise.
Is it? There's nothing happening around me.
I'm so confused. Is that just me?
Can you still hear it?
Yeah.
I can hear. Is it me? I can't.
If you can't hear it, I'll just carry on speaking. And if you can't hear it,
I can't hear that.
never mind. Yeah, Eraserhead, I think, is similar to many other Lynch films, very difficult to dissect, but I think that's kind of the fun of it. There is clear things in Eraserhead, interpretations you can take from it about Lynch becoming a father. He's obviously openly spoke about that in interviews previously. And I think Eraserhead was really a film that discovered so many issues in terms of sexuality, growing up, aging, and becoming, a figure, an adult. But I think the use of disturbing imagery often throws people off, and especially Eraserhead is, I think, one of his most difficult films to dissect, and I think it's one that is not made for a general audience. It's not one that I'd recommend to watch for a first Lynch in general, because I think that we see his use of the dark psychological things on display. The imagery is, let's be honest, just fucking weird, but it serves to highlight David Lynch's strength as an artist, where he can put things across that are so abstract, so abnormal, and create these ideas of his nervousness going into the father, his nervousness not knowing his place in life, knowing his work, almost becoming like a biographical film in a sense, but doing so in such a weird way, like presenting the scared nature of fatherhood with like a weird mutant baby, and obviously the ending and stuff like that. It is one that I think I definitely get why people don't like this one, because it is one of his weirder films. I think that's saying something because it's David Lynch, but I actually see it as a really powerful short project on many issues that the general audience faces, and that Lynch has openly said himself he's faced in the past in previous interviews. And I think Eraserhead is a for me, one of his most powerful films on an emotional level, in terms of seeing our main character's isolation, seeing his struggles. So Eraserhead's pretty, I don't want to say one of my favorites, because obviously we'll get into our rankings, and I don't actually think it's right up there, because I pretty much love most of his works, but I think it's one of the most impressive feature-length debuts ever, one of the most impressive debuts ever, one of the most recognized debuts ever. But I think, going back to what Alex said, it's not only Lynch that's understood, I think it's a film itself is most misunderstood. I think Eraserhead is probably his most misunderstood film. So yeah, I think it's great. I think it's really, really great.
Kind of disagree about it not being a good starting point for Lynch filmography. Just
really,
it's not really easily accessible, but I think it's a good point where you just you're kind of thrown into the deep end of just his weirdness, and sets you up kind of with everything that you're gonna see going forward.
I agree. I think it depends, because if someone was to start with Eraserhead, which I wouldn't recommend, I'll go on to, obviously we can explain what I'd recommend as like a starting point. So Lynch is one of those directors. It's not like a Fincher where you say to watch anything. Do you know what I mean? Watch Seven. Watch Fraggle. They follow a narrative pattern. Lynch isn't that sort of guy, and everyone has a different style point. And obviously, when we get onto that film, I'll tell you my reasons for that one. But I think Eraserhead is one of those where maybe if you start with it, watch his films, then go back to it down the line, you'll have more of an understanding there. But I think it's too abstract and too weird. It's almost too Lynch. You know what I mean? You want to warm people up a little bit at the start and start building up their kind of sobriety to that. But yeah, I know what you mean. I think a lot of people do watch it because it is very much in the deep end. So if that's something you wanted to do, it's obviously the best one for that.
Yeah, it's definitely something that gets better when you go back to after you've watched the rest. Yeah. But just the dreamlike states, the confusing narrative that you will see later on, and then just the horror elements mixed in as well. You just get a taste of everything that he's going to give you later on in his filmography.
That's true.
Yeah, and it's just such a, after watching the shorts, it was such a natural progression as well, because he started as a painter, obviously, and he just wasn't satisfied with just that, because he wanted them to move, so he made those first shorts, and they're just so weird and kind of terrifying at times. But yeah, they're just so cool, actual moving paintings. And then when he actually goes on to Eraserhead, it's such a great first feature. I think kind of different to the rest, though. It's very weird. It probably doesn't get that weird until the Twin Peaks Return or Inland Empire again. But yeah,
Inland Empire is that's the one I would not recommend. That's we'll get onto that, but that's the fucking strange one right there.
Yeah, you definitely leave that to last.
I watched Inland Empire before I watched Eraserhead, which is
that's weird.
Mad,
at least
thinking about it.
They're both weird, but Inland Empire is a whole nother beast. So it's like a 3-hour epic of weird. Eraserhead's 90 minutes. You know what I mean? It's double. It's crazy.
It's crazy that it came out in the 70s as well. What did people think about this? Because I know I've had such a hard time getting this into a film festival as well. They must have just.
Have you guys seen the street interviews where people came out the first screening and
yes,
get into
it's so
great. Because the reaction in the 70s, it was in this weird era where there started to be these kind of not surrealist projects, but these like dreamlike projects as well. For example, Kubrick's Clockwork Orange came out like 73, so a few years prior. I think it was a weird era though, but this kind of took it up a whole new level to the point where it really is like now it's a polarizing film, but back then it really was like the most love or hate film ever, because it's so something they weren't used to, especially like a new filmmaker. You know what I mean? There was nothing to expect going into it like previous.
There's nothing even really like it in horror as well. Like that would have been just after like the Exorcist times as well, where everybody was going crazy about that. So
Yeah, exactly.
there really wasn't anything like it. Yeah, I would just like talking about the sound as well. Like the sound is so important to Lynch's films, but I think it's so effectively used in Eraserhead as well to create that kind of horror atmosphere. And it's just like what you were talking about, like the anxiety and like fears about having a child and stuff like that. I mean, the sound is so important to stuff like that because the sound never goes away. There's always some weird noise going on in the background, like the wind.
Yeah.
They're in a room that's like got a brick wall against the window and everything, and there's like still wind. Like it makes no sense. So it just adds to like all that anxiety and like constantly like babies crying and just weird ringing noises in the background that just add to the anxiety. So
the dinner scene, the chicken scene, especially like out of nowhere, just the worst case scenario, isn't there? Just always coming up with that in Henry's mind as a character, I think is the main thing.
Yeah, and the practical effects are just crazy. Like that baby is so gross.
Mental.
Yeah. But yeah, Oscar, what did you think about Eraserhead?
Yeah, I think this is just as a debut, such a risk to take. Like he didn't start out safe at all. He was just making what he loved to do. And obviously this film kind of showcases one of Lynch's biggest influences, which is Philadelphia. And he calls this film the true Philadelphia story. And it's used across his films because it kind of shows this flip side of America. There's kind of the idea of like the false American dream. We see that a lot in his films like Mulholland Drive particularly. I think this film kind of sets out that well, kind of the industrialization, but it all of how I won't get into like spoilers for others who haven't seen it, but the parallels between Eraserhead and Twin Peaks: The Return are easy. They're like after it's nuts, and it's so good to see, honestly, because I love both those things so much. But Ryan, this film kind of sets out all his kind of lynching tropes. You see the curtains, like such a big factor used in this. That's probably my favorite thing that he does, just the curtains in every single one of his films. I think it's brilliant, and across Twin Peaks as well. But yeah, like I said, this is such an ambitious story, kind of through like the dark industrial setting, but also what it says about family. Like Seth was saying, yeah, I think he kind of the ending, especially, you get kind of that final shot that Alex was talking about. He likes to see the inside of things, like you get that shot of like the inside of the head as well, and that's used a lot. Even in Twin Peaks Return is a very similar shot actually. But yeah, I'm glad I watched this one. But yeah, this is such an impressive film, and even better on rewatch this week actually.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think Eraserhead is. Yeah, I think Eraserhead is definitely one of the most impressive debuts we've seen from any filmmaker. And he talks about, I know Oscar, you mentioned how ambitious it was for a first project. And when he was at AFI, I know he said that a lot of the other students were trying to make showcase films and films that were trying to impress people, where Lynch were just wanted to make something that he was proud of himself. And I guess the first thing I got to talk about is how influenced he was by the greatest city in the world, Philadelphia. And he really, coming from a small town in the Midwest, Lynch then moved to Philly and was kind of described as much of a culture shock. And, he really captures, 1970s Philadelphia was very different from what it is like today. And he captures kind of the poverty of the city in that time, especially in the neighborhoods he was living in. But it's always been a very blue collar city and very industrial. And he really captures these industrial sounds of the city with, one major theme which we see in his career is the way he uses like the sounds of running machines and different machine sounds, and he often likes to slow them down. And even though his background is in painting and we think of him, he's definitely a very visual director in terms of every frame's a painting. But despite his background in painting, I still think his most defining trait is the way he uses sound. And I think this is really his truest showcase of that, and him just exploring and trying different things. Where he has these industrial sounds, and every single room we're in has a different room tone to it, and he really raises the volume of that room tone, so you notice the different kind of atmospheric sound of every room. And this film goes a very long time. I forget exactly how long it goes, but it's very long before we even hear one line of dialogue in this film. Like, it's a good 15-20 minutes before any character speaks, and it's very much just immersing us in this sound landscape and these images that create certain feelings, and kind of leaves the audience to feel however they might feel about it. Also, his brilliant use of visual lines. He has just such a mastery of the directions of the lines and the images to create certain feelings, and these great uncomfortable pauses in the sound design, of course. And I like what he does with the sound of the kid, where it sounds like gross and disgusting, but at the same time, there's this vulnerable innocence to it, where we're kind of grossed out by the baby, but you can't help but care for it and feel for it at the same time, because it has that kind of, like I said, more disgusting sounds to it, but still has this vulnerable innocence that makes you want to take care of it, which I think is very contradictory, which is part of what makes it an interesting, provokes a lot of interesting ideas. And then, yeah, of course, it's super just remarkable how Lynch pulled this off. He kept running out of money. It took him 5 years just to get the film made. There's one cut in the film where they've jumped forward a year and a half in terms of when they were making the film. And I also think it's interesting how Lynch has said that there's not one critic ever whose interpretation of the film matches his own, which I find super interesting because, like I said, everyone's coming up with theories about what does the film mean, and it definitely does have that fear fatherhood element, but he claims that not one critic has accurately been able to figure out what the film means to him. So I've always found that very interesting. But Eraserhead sits at number 5 on my David Lynch rankings. Where does it sit for the rest of you?
5. Same as you.
I think I have it 7th.
So this is a 4.5 for me. Definitely. This is just Lynch. I have this at so this is a 4.5 for me, and I have this at 8. I think that just goes to show.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Oh, actually, no, sorry. Ignore that. It's because I got Twin Peaks in my ranking.
Yeah,
So if we're just going by films, then it's 6th.
Yeah, 6 for me as well.
Yeah, 6th.
Cool.
Well, yeah, moving on from Eraserhead, he then followed that up with The Elephant Man, which is much more like Seth talked about what a good starting point is to watch David Lynch, and this is definitely one of the more accessible films to everyone. It follows a more linear narrative, and it's not quite as abstract and needs to put the puzzle pieces together as some of his other work, like Eraserhead, but it's still very much a David Lynch film with his signature on it. So, Seth, what are your thoughts on David Lynch's follow-up, The Elephant Man?
Yeah, so this is I think this is actually my first Lynch I ever watched, which is, again, as you were saying, it's very accessible but very linear narrative, very focused. It obviously tells a story about a historical era piece that is, particularly underspoken about, and I think it's a really, really one of his best films ever for me, in my eyes. I think it's one of his most sort of emotional and touching films, allowing a character to really understand what their focus was and kind of what they were going through mentally. And also, I've heard, people talk about The Elephant Man as kind of his most melodramatic film, which I guess kind of in a sense makes sense because it is a subject like this, but it also just touches on so many great points that we can just take and use in our daily lives, such as just looking past someone's visual features, looking at someone as a person. And I think this is like one of the most, not just Lynch, one of the most emotional Lynch films, but one of the most touching films ever. Like, this fucking breaks me every time I watch it because it's a really, really hard hitting. It's a true story. They really took the research to make sure everything was right. You've got the two main cast members who, obviously the main one who undergo a massive transformation, and it's really a story about chemistry, love, and actually the need of a friend when you're in these isolated periods. I think it goes back to what you guys were saying. Lynch really utilizes his best visual impact within a film like this. So many of the sequences are so isolating in nature. I think this really showcases his best work, especially in the black and white as well. I think it highlights the depressing tone of the film. But I think The Elephant Man is one of his best. It's not really one I'd recommend as a first, because whilst it's the most accessible, which obviously we're going to the straight story as well, which is similar to this in terms of its progression narrative wise, I also think it's almost too straightforward. You know what I mean? You want a little bit of weirdness in a first Lynch, but I do think this is one of his best ever works. And I think this also showcases his range as a filmmaker, especially going Eraserhead 3 years earlier back to back with a film like this, which is very much more down to earth, very touching, showcasing a period part of history and an important character, but also telling some life lessons without getting too preachy and pushy, but also with reducing the amount of melodramatic nature and making it just a really sad and an emotional story. Do you want me to say where they go in my ranking now, or do you want to wait for the end?
I'm just saying no.
Okay, so this is number 2 on my list. It's very, very high for me. Very high.
Interesting. Yeah, like you said, it is more digestible for a general audience, and it really is a natural progression from Eraserhead, keeping that kind of black and white, almost body horror kind of aesthetic. However, yeah, it is more like kind of affectionate narrative, like you said. Only second film, which is crazy after how good it is. I think it is one of the best films of the 80s and one of the more emotional films ever made in general, like you said. One of his more successful as well, just in terms of awards, like 8 Oscar nominations. Unfortunately, didn't win any. But it did win 3 BAFTAs, so that's good. But yeah, the really standout from that was John Hurt as like the best actor nomination. Like, he was just phenomenal in this film. Like, to be able to give that performance with so much compassion and emotion with all that makeup on is really quite crazy. And it's honestly quite up there with like the best performances I've ever seen. Just in general. It really is the backbone of this film, like pretty much being different to quite a lot of these other films. Instead of it's like a mystery like normal, or it's trying to confuse you, like Lynch decides to just like break you, like you said. Like, John Hurt's performance is like, it just completely disappears into this role, into that like kind of like sweet vulnerable elephant man that really carries all the emotion that comes with this film. And carrying over that black and white like style, it's really an interesting choice to be shown black and white. Like, but I think it really perfectly works with this, because it not only like kind of hides like the practical effects, like they probably wouldn't look as good if it was in color, because there'd probably be a lot of imperfections with it. But yeah, the Elephant Man as a narrative is also like quite reminiscent of like old monster films such as like Frankenstein or Creature from the Black Lagoon, where like you want to sympathize with the character.
I think it as well, the way I compare it to like a Seven Samurai, the way he uses the black and white almost makes it feel like an actual documentary of sorts, just following his life. And he gives it like an authentic feel. And I agree with what you said. If it was to use in color with practical effects, in the late 70s, it wouldn't have looked nearly as good. And I think it also just matches the tone perfectly. And I definitely agree as well with like, similar to many of the earlier Universal monster films, specifically the first Frankenstein. 100%. I think the tone and the themes are very similar, if not exact. Definitely.
Yeah, exactly. Just kind of like introducing that like monster type figure that you gradually like just become more and more like see this human side of the character. Like, it really grows on you. But yeah, it's kind of a standard narrative kind of in that sense that it's very old and reused, but it had such a like Lynch flair to it that really makes it such a special film, I think. But yeah. This sits number 5 for me in my ranking. I've got it at 4.5, so I still think it's great. I love all the Fincher's films, so it doesn't mean anything if it's lower down. But yeah, Oscar, what did you think about The Elephant Man?
Yeah, this is just such an incredible film as a whole. I think it's just obviously shows like him as the master of the genres, really the things he can do, and I think it's such well done kind of direction and writing to make us feel such empathy for a character, which at the time like people would just be horrified about, because obviously it's a true story. But even the look of the character, and I think the way he uses the character and through things like facial expressions and like disgust, and like slowly as the film goes on, even in the beginning, you haven't you hardly kind of you see the character's face at all, and you're already just feeling so sorry for this character. But I think he just does that so well, and obviously that's very much owed to the performances of this film, Anthony Hopkins and John Hurt, of course. I when I first watched this, I almost didn't recognize Anthony Hopkins because he's just so young in this.
Yeah.
Because obviously I'm kind of more used to seeing him as a much older person now, but I think he puts in a fantastic performance as well. But yeah, I think like you guys have said, the black and white works so much better than it would have done in color for this film. The sadness, I guess I've said this before, but like black and white is kind of a bit of a cheat code for great cinematography. I don't know, a lot of people don't like the use of like black and white coloring when color is there, but I completely disagree. I think this is perfectly used in this film. Yeah, so for me, this sits at number 5 in my ranking. I have this a high 4.5, slightly better than Eraserhead for me. One that I didn't get a chance to rewatch this week, but I definitely will be in it. Yeah, it's just such an impactful film. I had such a great time with this one. Alex?
Yeah, I think The Elephant Man is a beautifully human film, and it's definitely like one of Lynch's most moving films. And I think it's the type of film that no matter who you are, if you watch this and you get to the end, you're going to be moved by it. And if you get to the end of this film and feel no emotion, then I think that says a lot about you as a person, because there's so much heart in this movie, and it's really all about what's on the inside doesn't always match what's on the outside. And I know one of the executives, after they first screened the film, said, it's going to be hard to sell a monster movie like this. And Lynch and the producers were very upset by that, because the whole idea of the film is that it's not a monster movie. It's about the fact that what's on the outside doesn't match what's on the inside. And, in the beginning, we see the Elephant Man as more like an animal and like a showcase. And obviously there's the famous line, "I'm not an animal, I'm a human being." And the very first time we hear him speak, it's him saying his name. And I think that holds so much weight, because the whole idea is that he has a name. He's not an animal, he's a human being with a name. And that's when we first kind of are starting to see that, because earlier we see them say that they hope he's an idiot for his own sake. And we start to see that there is this creative side and this kind of vulnerability to him as a character. And, we really see that in the scene with the actress, where they really bond and connect over art and literature. And I think that's a great scene, because unlike a lot of the high society people, you never see any even hint of disgust in her face. And she even goes as far as to come down to his own eye level, which is very subtle, but it just shows that she's not someone who's looking down on him as a freak from high society, and really sees him as an equal and a fellow human being, just the way she comes down to his eye level to speak to him. And I really love how the film evolves everyone around him, like the head of the hospital, who originally is saying, we can't cure him, we can't keep him, and then becomes one of the main people fighting for him. And like the nurses, who like the one nurse who screams when she enters the room the first time, then by the end, she's like super supportive of him, and is someone who really does deeply care about him, both the young nurse and the older nurse. And this, just the way as people really, as they begin to get to know John Merrick and see who he is on the inside, the way they begin to care about him, is that development, I think, is really what makes it so effective on the rest of us, because that's essentially the stand-in for most of us, where when we first see him, we're all a little kind of jump back, and then as the story progresses, we really start to care about this character so much, which makes that ending so heartbreaking. And I love the symbolism of the like the cathedral that he crafts, where obviously that shows his artistic ability and that he has this artist with inside of him. But I think it's so symbolic, because this hospital, his whole life, he's kind of been exploited and tortured to a degree. Actually, not to a degree, he's definitely tortured. And I think the cathedral really represents like this place of safety, and like having a home and having a place where he can be safe and explore his own creativity. And he never really had that until the hospital, which is why I think it's so brilliantly symbolic of who he is on the inside, as someone who just wants a place to be safe. And kind of a place of comfort. And then, of course, Lynch does a great job with the curiosity we always see with Lynch, where Anthony Hopkins' character is really driven by his curiosity, and we're curious about what's behind the mask, and we see the figure through the curtain silhouetted, and we're curious if he can speak at first, and of course has that Lynchian curiosity as well. But Elephant Man, just a beautifully touching film, and this sits at number 4 on my David Lynch ranking at a 5-star. But uh, yeah, so let's now move on to a film that I don't think many of us have many positive things to say about, and that is David Lynch's Dune, a film that he has disowned as an artist, and where he did not have final cut. He was not in control of the final edits, so there was a butcher job by the studio. And I personally have not seen this film, so I don't want to watch it until after I've seen Denise Part 2, because I want to learn the ending from Denise's version rather than Lynch's. But yeah, so I haven't seen this one. I can't say anything about it. But Seth, what are your thoughts on David Lynch's Dune?
Yeah, so there's like 3 films in his filmography I've watched recently, or rewatched, should I say. It has been like 2 or 3 years since I last watched Dune, but it's a very, like you said, studio interference was massive with this. Very similar to like an Alien 3 for David Fincher, where the work, he was so thrown in last minute. There were chops and changes with the script. Everything was just interfered massively, and he didn't really get to put his own soul into it. And then eventually, he disregards it as a piece of his own art now. I think there are elements of good in here. I think that it has this weird charm to it. I actually think the production and the actual design of the sets is actually really, really cool, especially for the 80s. It has a very sort of foreign feel that I really appreciate it. And I think the main issue I have with it is just the lack of coherence in the script. Most of the time, I had little idea of what was actually happening within the first hour. The performances are stale. They're weird. They're bland. Really, the only positive I have is actually the design itself, because I do think it looks cool. But I think as an adaptation of the book, from what I know, anyway, I haven't read the book, but from what I've read and know and what Lynch has said, it just didn't work. And the script was the issue for that because of the lack of coherence within the first half. And it's just honestly quite boring, is the main thing I'd say to it. Like, regardless of how great the visuals are, and I do think they are pretty good at times, it's so dull. I have this last, no surprise, I think most people do. I have a 2.5, so I don't think it's like terrible by any means. I just think it's dull for the most part, but it has some weird, odd charm here and there, but unfortunately, not much. So yeah, it's last on my list anyway.
Yeah, this is definitely last on my list as well. I don't hate this film as much as other people do. I have as a 3-star. I think, like Seth said, that kind of the bit charm when the production is actually really, really nice. But I have read the book, and the film, for me, this just suffers from the fact that just the runtime is just absolutely nowhere near enough you need to get into a film like this, which is why I think it's a much better job to keep it in 2 parts now. There's just so much to explore, and everything is in the end just so rushed. You don't even get to see half the things that are in like the second half of the book that are in this film. I kind of, because I watched this after I'd finished the book this year, and I was just really, really kind of surprised that half the stuff they don't go over. Yeah, the CGI hasn't aged the best. I think the shields are a massive talking point among
That's
a lot
the
of
only
people.
thing I've seen from it.
The shields are fucking like, I'll praise the design, but I'm not praising that because they're terrible. It's so weird. It looks really weird, honestly.
Yeah, it is. But yeah, overall, I honestly, I don't hate it. I don't think it's like the piece of rubbish that a lot of people say it is. But for me, the second half is where it falls apart the most, just because there's just not enough there. And yeah, I don't want to go into spoilers for the second half, because obviously Alex and Ryan, even Seth, because like there's so much missed out of that second half, is ridiculous. But yeah, spoiler 3 thoughts sits dead last in my rankings. It's perfectly fine.
All right, so now we can move on to a much better Lynch film, and this next one is one of my personal favorites, and I think this is probably the best starting film for Lynch, and that is his masterpiece Blue Velvet. So, Seth, take us away. What are your thoughts on David Lynch's Blue Velvet follow-up to Dune?
This is my startup film for Lynch. This is the one I always recommend because I think this has the perfect mix of like a linear, followable story. You know, the passage of you can understand it, and I think it also has so many frequencies, sequences of Lynch's surrealist nature as well. I think it's the best of both worlds, and this is the one I always recommend as a first film. It's also one of my favorites. I think no one can kind of capture the fever dream essence as well as Lynch can. I think that's so evident in Blue Velvet. Similar to like a Lost Highway in terms of how it feels. I think I love the use of the stylish use. I love the use of color as well, especially in the main room in which the most of the film takes place, obviously. And I think it's kind of easy to see why it's so divisive as a project, but I personally love it. I think, what's his name? Frank Hopper? That's his name?
Yeah.
Dennis
Hopper.
Dennis.
Frank Booth. Yeah.
Just pure sadism, like a man who is literally put there to portray every taboo, everything bad about the world. One of my favorite I think I put a video the other day, one of the most intimidating movie figures ever. Just a man that I found pure evil. And I think that it really works as not only its realist nature, but as a weird film that has a lot in there, and I think works as someone who can watch it for a first film. I've actually only seen this once, and it's been around, I'm going to say like a year, so I'm not too fresh in my memory. But this is, so far as of right now, my number 3 Lynch. And I think it's the perfect starting point for anyone wanting to get into Lynch because it has the best of both worlds.
I was watching a documentary on how this got made, and Dennis Hopper's agent didn't want him to do this because at the time he had like a reputation for being just a coke addict or something.
And then he does a film like this where he's literally embodying everything evil in the world.
Yeah, so
like some of the
interesting
scenes,
characters.
fucking like the mask and shit, it's so crazy. And it really is just the perfect guy to represent something like that. I don't think he could have been better cast if they looked for, amongst thousands of applicants, he just worked perfectly in the role. Same with Isabella Rossellini. I think she was perfect as well in her role, playing like this kind of intimidated, tedious figure. But yeah, I didn't say whereas it's currently number 3 in my list. Number 3.
Yeah, the cast is just so good. Like I love Kevin MacLachlan.
Yeah, he's so good.
His like run in the 80s was crazy because he done this and then he done The Hidden, which is like a really cool like kind of horror 80s hidden gem, and then
Dune.
Dune.
Yeah. Can't forget that.
And then he had his best role as Dale Cooper in Twin Peaks at the end of the 80s. So it's just a great decade for him. But he's just such a fun actor. He's definitely my favourite person that Lynch worked with throughout his career. But then Laura Dern, she's just an amazing actress. And then on top of that, just an insane performance from Dennis Hopper as Frank Booth. He's one of the most memorable like people from like any film. He's just such a crazy character, and like I don't know, that actually does put people off this film, like his performance, just because of how weird it is, and just the shit he says is just so out of pocket at times. But yeah, he's so hilarious though. I love it. Yeah, just like you were talking about as well, like just the production design and everything, like the colours of the film, it's kind of that classic David Lynch cartoons and strong reds and blues that you see later on, and it mostly whenever the characters are in like a place where they're not used to, or like almost like another world compared to their normal lives, they use that kind of like production design. Like when they first go to the bar and they hear Dorothy sing Blue Velvet, it's very clear that Laura Dern's kind of outside of her comfort zone, and she's still in high school, so she's kind of accessing it like this more like adult world through Jeffrey. And I think Lynch perfectly like contrasts that with like the settings by kind of juxtaposing the kind of suburban areas with this like new environment, this kind of more underground adult part of the town. And yeah, just you see that throughout the whole film in general, which I really like about the film is like kind of the dark side that he kind of tries to show under suburban lifestyle in America, and that's kind of just kind of what this film's about. And he once again shows that in Twin Peaks later on at the end of the 80s, so it's just a topic that he does kind of like to go back to all the time. A very interesting mystery with so many layers on top of it. So this is, like you said, I think you probably are right. This might be the best entry into Lynch's filmography because it is kind of that mix. Because it's it's a narrative that you can follow, but it does have that weirdness to it. And it is a 4.5 for me, and it's 4 for my ranking actually. So I really love this film. But yeah, Oscar, what did you think about Blue Velvet?
Yeah, likewise with you guys. I absolutely love this film too. So I've seen this film 3 times this year already. It's gone up half a star each time. It now sits at a 5 out of 5 and also sits number 4 at my ranking. It started out at a 4 and it's just gone up bit by bit. I just think, like you guys said already, definitely for me, the entry point for Lynch's filmography. You get kind of a small taste of everything in this. I think it just works so well from the beautiful opening shot of just the red roses in front of the fence, just tells you kind of everything, even like the advert as well that it has on behind there about the kind of like idealistic neighborhood that Jeffrey lives in. And I think there's so many well done contrasts in this. You kind of get Jeffrey's nightmares versus Sandy's dreams in this. Right from the get go, the soundtrack, the song, I've had that song stuck in my head all year long. It's absolutely brilliant. So many parallels between this film and kind of some of his later works, and I'll get into a bit more, but with like the Wizard of Oz as well. I feel like you start to see kind of Lynch's love for that film shine in this. But like I said, there's definitely shines more in more of his other works. I love the like subtle nods in the script of Van Gogh as well because of the cut off ear. I think that's really really clever. I noticed that when rewatching it the other week actually. Yeah, it's just such a brilliant story, kind of woven about kind of a young teenager, kind of mixed with love and this juxtaposition that Ryan mentioned about the kind of the dark side of the town and kind of the simpler side of the town, I guess. And you kind of see bits of like not lost hope because this was made by then, but like Alex was mentioning, kind of the things of the cars, how he likes the kind of the shot of the headlights on the road. You see that a lot of this kind of just the yellow split down the middle. I love those shots. I think they're absolutely brilliant. But yeah, and you kind of see I quite like he uses the Robin kind of towards the end of this film, which is quite a staple part of the Twin Peaks opening. I think that's what I just love about like rewatching his films like over and over. I just see so many things that just connect all of his films together that kind of shine across all areas really. I think that's what's most impressive. But yeah, and I think even like the use of the Blue Velvet song, like the lyrics, add so much like to the film as well, because it opened and closes with the song. But yeah, this film, I love it to bits. It's got so much to unpack, and it's just so wild and enjoyable. So good.
Where is it in your rank?
Number 4. Number 4.
Yeah, nice, nice.
That's definitely gone up over time. So good. Alex?
Yeah, Blue Velvet is one of my favorite films ever, and it's The Elephant Man is the only David Lynch film I haven't seen in theaters, and this might be the one that's most elevated by the theater experience, where when you're just immersed in that sound landscape, it really puts you in a dreamlike state that David Lynch wants to create. And I think, we look at the 80s as a film era, and I love the 80s as an era a lot, but it's very blockbuster heavy and very all about consumerism and, feel good endings, likable characters, and kind of like, the Hollywood style film. Whereas David Lynch really, in the beginning, kind of paints that image here with this white picket fence, like paradise suburbia. And then really, like Ryan said, it touches on the darkness beneath the surface, and I think that really reflects its era, which it was made, where we see, we see the kind of paradise suburbia, like the way the film industry was at that time, and kind of how David Lynch is in a way maybe saying that there are, darker stories and darker truths to reality and human nature, even though the movies of the time were portraying, the likable character where everything works out in the end. And yeah, like we've talked about, this is him really exploring that detective side of people's brains and really doing like a detective noir in a different way, where Jeffrey and Sandy are both driven by their curiosity, and that's really what drives the entire narrative of the film, where they want to find out more, and that then leads them into the great scene of what's her name? Jeff hiding in the closet of Dorothy Valens. And that scene, I think, is just, there's so many things I could say that are brilliant about it, like the way the toilet flushes and that, so he can't hear the car horn, or the way when she's holding the knife to him as he has his pants down, and just the off screen, the way it puts the image in our head, and it's just like making everyone cringe. And David Lynch in this film will create suspense, and a lot of times you'll see suspense and maybe it won't always have the negative effect that you think it will. But here it's like he drags out the suspense of if she's going to catch him, and then she actually does catch him, where a lot of other films will be like, they'll do the thing where like he almost gets caught and he doesn't. Whereas now in this film, like she catches him and he doesn't get arrested. What happens is, ends up being much worse is, the stakes of being in the same room as Frank, where now he has to witness this horrible rape scene. And there's the idea of the way the film explores evil, where Jeffrey, obviously, he's seeing is horrible what's happening to her, but when it cuts back to Jeffrey, his eyes almost never look down. Like his eyes are glued to watching this horrific abuse, and even though he's disturbed by it, he can't take his eyes away from it, which I think is kind of like part of what we see in David Lynch films, is this curiosity towards violence and evil, where Lynch, from this point on, really always has a character who represents pure evil, with that being Frank Booth here. And Lynch is someone who's very curious about violence and evil. And I think we see that in the character of Jeffrey, where even though, like all of us, he's disturbed by it, he's curious and can't take his eyes off it. And I think we also see that through Sandy, who doesn't see what Jeffrey's seen. And she really is kind of attracted to Jeffrey by, as Jeffrey's watching this, she's outside wondering what's happening to him. And now she's not thinking about her boyfriend, she's thinking about him. And it's that curiosity is what's driving her and kind of leading them together. And it's interesting how, we have the two women who, Sandy being the light and Dorothy being the dark, but they're introduced almost in opposite ways, where Sandy emerges from the shadow while Dorothy is more of a like beautiful imagery in terms of how she's introduced. But right after the scene where the scene where he's hiding in the closet and he's telling Sandy, we see her like look up at the sky with like this nice church music, and talks about like this hopeful, that she talks about the robin. And it's probably very kind of refreshing for Jeffrey to have to hear this after the horrors he's just seen. But this film also really plays around with interiors versus exteriors, and kind of the way Taxi Driver makes us question people in urban city. This makes us question people in suburbia, and just the difference of how people behave when they're by themselves, and how no one wants to be seen in the vulnerable state when they're by themselves. Like when he's watching Dorothy when she's just home alone and thinks she's home alone. And then what's like the famous line from that scene? It's "Don't you look at me," because no one wants to be seen in kind of this lone, vulnerable state. And really, there's, like I said, there's that exploration of evil where, what's his name? Jeff kind of sees that there's an evil inside of him, and he feels this kind of attraction to it. We see him even get to the point of hitting Dorothy, and he then cries when he's thinking about it, because he's worried that he could one day become like Frank, and that something that's inside of Frank is inside of him. And this attraction to the darkness that I think we see from Lynch as an artist, I definitely think he explores through Jeffrey. And then, of course, the beautiful ending, or I'm going to say beautiful ending, but the brilliant ending, which is, I didn't love the ending when I first saw the film. I was kind of confused by it. But when we open up the film, we see these beautiful suburbia paradise imagery with the beautiful romanticized Bobby Vinton music. And in the end, we see those same images again, but now we have a new feeling about it. When we first see them, we think we're going into, like a typical 80s kind of Hollywood style world. And by the end of it, we see the same images, but we have a different feeling about them, because we've seen so much more and learned so much about this place, and know that it's not the white picket fence paradise that we initially think. And then that final image of Dorothy hugging her son, which if that was at the beginning of the film, you would be like, this is a beautiful mother and her daughter moment. But then we see her eyes move to the side, and we hear that it changes to her version of Blue Velvet. And I think what that really implies is that even though she's reunited with her son and everything seems like it's all like happy Hollywood ending, there's still these dark trauma and memories that she can't get rid of. And even though she's hugging her son, she's thinking about what it was like being away from him and the horrors and trauma she's been through. And I just love how he kind of bookends the images by showing you the same images again with a new feeling, which just shows the brilliance of David Lynch as an artist. And this sits for me at, of course, a 5-star. I think it's one of the best films ever made, and it's number 2 on my David Lynch ranking. But now we can move on to, I think, next would be Twin Peaks, which was a TV series David Lynch did, followed by a film that he did tied in with the series. So I haven't seen any Twin Peaks. I can't speak on this, but Seth, what are your thoughts on this series?
I've seen one episode ever, so and that was like 2 years ago, so I have no idea. I will watch it eventually, though, definitely.
So Oscar, what are your thoughts on Twin Peaks?
Incredible. Don't even know where to start, to be honest. I saw this September. I binged the whole thing in less than a week. Yeah, this is absolutely one of my favorite shows ever. This show's just got so much going for it. The style that everyone's kind of so used to. I think the theme song, the title sequences is arguably my favorite ever. I listen to that every day, honestly. The character's hilarious. The tone that they give off just perfectly matches everything. It's almost satirical at some points. I love Dale Cooper's character, one of my favorite protagonists ever. I think Carl McLaughlin just does such a good job in that role. Season 1, I think, is absolutely perfect. Obviously, season 2 is a lot longer. Yeah. Season 2, obviously, there are kind of parts that we see. Lynch isn't there. I won't spoil why Lynch isn't there. Kind of after 9 episodes, Lynch leaves the show and he makes an incredible return for the finale, which is the season 2 finale. Is absolutely one of my favorite TV episodes ever. It's incredible, but not just incredible because it's an incredible episode. It's just the way he manages to tie up all the loose ends of what happened while he wasn't there and culminate into such a great finale. And then we get into fire. Well, actually, okay. I'll give my kind of rankings because I've integrated my rankings a bit. So for me, I would have the first season of Twin Peaks kind of sits around like 5th. If I'm like including it in there, I'd kind of have it in between Blue Velvet and Elephant Man. The first season for me, the second season has higher highs, I think, than the first season, but it has a lot of filler. Obviously, while Lynch wasn't there, so that kind of definitely falls down my rankings. But to be honest, if I'm just going by, because already this is like a David Lynch ranking, so if I'm going by the stuff that he was actually involved in, then it's much higher. I think it's 2 perfect seasons of television, like as in when he was there. And then actually, Ryan, you can give your thoughts on the first 2 seasons, and then we'll go into Firewalk with Me.
Yeah, well, I won't go into too much detail because it's spoilers. But yeah, that second season where he's not, or well, half of it when he's not there, it was really a tough part to get through because it's kind of cheesy, like 80s, 90s, like TV.
They try so hard to be David Lynch. It's
They just
ridiculous.
have no clue what they're doing. But yeah, the first season I binged that in like 2 days. It's one of the best seasons of TV I think I've ever seen. It's just wonderful, like Lynch, like just the kind of dark side of him mixed in with the kind of weird characters and just his great directing approach just to like TV, which is very different from his films. But yeah, once you embrace like those like weird elements and stuff, I think it is one of the best TV shows ever made. Yeah, but I watched it last year and then I just stopped because I knew I was about to go into like 10 episodes of just no Lynch, so I just stopped and then just finished it 2 weeks ago. But yeah, it's definitely in my at least top 10 shows of all time, but I've not finished season 3 yet. But yeah, do you want to talk about Firewalk with Me?
Yeah, so Firewalk with Me, for me, I'll just say this right off the bat. This for me is definitely 5 out of 5. Sits number 3 in favorite films. Sits in my like top 30 of all time, honestly. For me, this Is this the scariest film? It's up there with Inland Empire with me. I think there's definitely exceeding this with that absolutely terrifying. Especially kind of towards the end of this. I'm not going to go into spoilers, but there's one obviously the famous, infamous ending scenes of this is just kind of one prolonged, terrifying scene that is shot perfectly. The score in this film is absolutely unreal. It elevates this kind of the whole level, the scariest level of the film onto another plane. Obviously, this film was infamously just dumped on at Cannes Film Festival when it premiered. People absolutely hated it, and I think it's clever because all like the first two seasons have this tone. Fire Alchemy has a really, really different tone, and then you get The Return, which also has a really, really different tone. People hated that because of how different the tone was. Obviously because they were made quite close together, but you kind of in the first half of this film it's a real mystery, and there's kind of a lot of lynching things going on that I think just works so well, and add to the obviously because the film's a prequel, which I actually didn't know until about halfway into watching the show, which I'm glad I didn't know because I was honestly thinking about skipping some of it just to get to the film, but I'm glad I didn't. Yeah, this film just works so well as a prequel, and sets up kind of what we know as Twin Peaks perfectly. I think the ending of this film is absolutely incredible. But yeah, one of my favorite Lynch films, one of my favorite films in general. I've seen it 3 times in about 3 months actually, which is just owed to how much I love this film so much. But I know Ryan. 1 second.
I'll just go on. It's kind of crazy how much David Lynch was terrorized at like Cannes because and he was booed for this and the next film we'll talk about. He was also booed for, but it's just crazy because this is like a masterpiece. I think it's even higher, or it exceeded my expectations coming off of Twin Peaks. Like I was completely blown away from this film. I gave it a 5 out of 5 on Letterboxd, which I don't do often for films on the first watch. That's just how good this was. Like it's so satisfying after you've like known the characters over 2 seasons and then go into his second that he's ranking for me. Yeah, it's just a masterpiece in his filmography. It's kind of Lynch set loose from the shackles of network TV. Like everything from his visual style to like the thematic horrors that like we see within Suburbia, like we did in Blue Velvet, is just insanely elevated from like what he actually done within the first 2 seasons. Like he's no stranger to blending horror elements into this film, but this is like straight up kind of horror. Like this and Eraserhead are like his proper like horror films. Um,
There's one scene in this I know because like we watched it at the same time the other week. We did like just a mini watch party for it. There's one like jump scare in this that I know that we're probably thinking the same thing. That just every time I just cannot watch it because it's absolutely terrifying. But the editing as well, I think in across kind of this film just works so well. It's not like from a technical aspect. I think that's what makes the horror work so well in this film. But yeah, I think even in like the final scenes, like the big climax of the film is like contains one of my favorite shots of a film ever, and it's bad because it's such an awful shot in the sense, and it's really really haunting. But yeah.
mm. Yeah, and it's a good like kind of transitioning point to season 3, I think, because that is where his style changes a lot, and it is more like Inland Empire because like obviously season 3 shot on like digitally because he just stopped shooting on film at that point. But yeah, so it's quite different from the first 2 seasons. But yeah, I've not finished that yet, but it's great so far.
Yeah, season three for me actually, I hold it the highest of the 3 seasons. Um, I think season 2 has the highest highs, but season like along with season 1, the return is just so incredibly consistent. Obviously all episodes directed by him in this one. And I honestly had no idea like going into this what this is going to be like, and it blew me away. Within like the first episode, there's a scene in the first episode of season 3 that I think is one of the scariest scenes Lynch has done. It's absolutely terrifying. It's almost like because the CGI in the return isn't fantastic, but it's on purpose, and I think it works so well with his style. And like I said before, there are so many nods to Eraserhead in the return season. I know there's one episode in particular, and there's kind of like a setting and a scene that's used throughout this season that is kind of just screams Eraserhead so much. Ryan, you probably haven't got to that yet, but I know a lot of people didn't love this. The ending, the final episode is just so Lynch. The scene to close it all is, I think, it's incredible. It's terrifying, it's haunting. I'm not going to go into it, but yeah, as a whole, the return, I have a 5-star as well. I think it's absolutely brilliant. Like I said, it's just so consistent. Scarily stacked cast as well. Matthew Lillard,
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Watts, Amanda Seyfried. It's so good. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's so great to see. Kind of imagine, like you said, imagine you have to wait 25 years for the 3rd season.
It's ridiculous. It's so different as well, because I think once some directors, they go into the digital era of like filmmaking, they kind of just fall off completely and like they make terrible films. But I think that's maybe did put some people off in this season, but I think it is so good. Like, he really does adapt so well to it, and it just lets him like have that freedom to do whatever he wants as well, because it's much cheaper as well. We've seen that in Inland Empire, like it's his longest film, so like it really allowed him to make longer films and just do whatever he wanted with it. So yeah, it's really cool.
Or I think because there's so much room for like interpretation with the Lynch project, but I think I ended up like watching loads of video essays on YouTube after I watched Twin Peaks. I think there's a 4-hour video essay on YouTube about the whole thing that I ended up watching. This is just fascinating, which I kind of put on the side when I've been doing work and things like that. But I like, it's secretly one of the most meta shows out there, and like it's so subtle. But like when I was watching that video, I know Lynch will probably just, if you tell him in his face, he'll probably just say no, because that's what he does with most people in interviews. Like, oh, is this what the film means? He just says no, and that's it. But yeah, I think it's as a show is absolutely one of my, I think it's my 2nd favorite show ever. It's so good, and absolutely up there in his filmography. For me, is one of his best things easily.
Yeah, definitely.
Right, moving on.
So I actually realized we did skip one. We skipped Wild at Heart, which stars Nick Cage and David Lynch's longtime collaborator, Laura Dern, who, watching through Lynch's filmography, you really see the talents and versatility of her as an actress, between Blue Velvet and then playing in essentially an opposite character in Wild at Heart, and then Inland Empire, just taking her talents at a totally new level where she explores such a variety of emotions. But Seth, what are your thoughts on Wild at Heart?
Yeah, so I watched this like fairly recently, I think, at least in the last like sort of few months or whatever. I think Wild at Heart is brilliant. It's chaotic, it's wild, as it says in the title, and it's kind of Lynch's unapologetic take on the romance genre and appearing into a different element. And I think it's also one of his most compassionate films as well, I find, between the relationship between Nicolas Cage and Laura Dern's character. It's also endlessly quotable, genuinely quite funny, and so strange, but again, compassionate in a way we hadn't really seen, or they hadn't really seen from him, before this time, I would argue, within this surrealist element. I think it's chaotic at the best of times, but I also love the parallels it has to like pop culture references, especially in that era, not only with like music and stuff, but also, one of the most famous parallels in the film is Wizard of Oz. There is so much stuff in there. For example, them taking the path of Yellow Brick Road, them driving to New Orleans. You've got Laura Dern's character Lula sounds right.
Yeah,
Lula's character, Lula's mom, who is like the what's her name in the fucking Wizard of Oz?
Wicked Witch,
yeah, exactly, yeah. And then you've got like Willem Dafoe's freakish, weird, intense character, Willem Dafoe, just being Willem Dafoe as always, just being absolutely brilliant. Him kind of portraying the Oz in a way, like promising things, not delivering on things. We also see one of the creepiest scenes, or the most kind of seedy scenes in a Lynch film, with him and Laura Dern, which I think is just crazy. And I also think the use of color in this, the kind of bright tonality, the electrifying energy, the also music loving energy as well. I think it works in a way which it showcases his surreal elements, but it also has an element of compassion. Two people, Nicolas Cage and Laura Dern, on the hope for bigger and better things, looking to improve their livelihoods, whilst also being chased by their past and getting involved with some weird stuff as well. I think Wild at Heart is great. It's not my favorite Lynch by any means. I would check where it is. I have it at a 4-star, I believe. So it's probably around the bottom, which is crazy because you don't get often, directors who you can say a 5-star and is around the bottom, especially not with me. So it's currently 7th in my ranking, but again, 6th in my ranking. But again, really, really good. Full of stuff to enjoy. Very, very quotable. And Nick Cage and Laura Dern are the duo in the film are two of my favorite characters in a Lynch project today. And I just love the parallels as well. It's just so much fun, I think, but also compassionate, as I said.
Yeah, the Wizard of Oz parallels are so good. Like even the one when they're like planning to rob the bank and it showed through a mystic ball. It's kind of like the Wicked Witch, like looking at them for that.
Exactly.
Yeah, and there was even a munchkin that was in the film that got cut. So it really wasn't hiding his like love for this film at all.
It fits, doesn't it? Wizard of Oz surrealist nature is very ahead of its time in that period. I think David Lynch has definitely taken a lot of influence from that in his work, so it definitely fits. I mean, if you were to imagine an old school Hollywood era film that Lynch would like, it would probably be that in general. Do you know what I mean? Because that fits it really well.
Yeah, it kind of stops it just being like a kind of not generic, but just kind of normal film in the 90s as well. Like definitely. I think this is what like true romance wishes it was. Like, I think this is so much better.
Yeah, that's true.
Kind of came at a weird point in his career because he filmed this after the first, or just the pilot of Twin Peaks. So this is like just as he was becoming like a household name. They just started shooting this, and it's kind of one of his more accessible films. Not his most popular. It's certainly quite underrated. And it kind of his most successful as well, kind of because it did win the Palme d'Or at the Cannes, even though they still booed it as he was going up to accept his award. I don't know why he kept going back to Cannes because it just seems like they booed him every time he went there, which is crazy. But yeah, Lynch said that like he like loves making the movies, like editing them, and then it's released, and that's where the heartbreak begins. And that is really quite true of just like the story of like him releasing his films, just getting like hate as soon as they get released. But yeah, I love this film. It's I've got it at 4 out of 5 as well. I think I've got it 7th in my ranking. So it's, yeah, like you said, like it's at the bottom. It's like lower tier Lynch, but none of his films are bad. Like they're all great, I think.
Apart from Dune, maybe. Just
well, I've not seen.
Then again, maybe that isn't really his film in general, so he doesn't count. I'm going to count it.
True.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oscar.
Yeah, so for me, this film sits at 7th in my ranking as well. I visited a 4.5 though. I've seen this film twice this year. It went up for me on a rewatch in the past week. Like I started to mention earlier, like Seth mentioned, the Wizard of Oz influence in this film is nuts. And particularly Seth, I'd recommend a documentary that Ryan recommended to me actually called LYNCH Oz. That I watched yesterday. I know Alex watched it as well, but I'd watched it after watching all of Twin Peaks because there is a bit of spoilers in there about Twin Peaks, but it's just fascinating the influence that film has had on all of these films, and in particular this film. Obviously, kind of we see Lula wearing red shoes quite a lot, and there's just shots of her red shoes. Obviously, nod to Dorothy. There's literally a scene where Lula throws water onto a picture in the photo just disappears in smoke. I think it's absolutely brilliant. And obviously we get the good witch, the good fairy at the end, played by Cheryl Lee, who is famously played Laura Palmer in Twin Peaks, which I just noticed on a rewatch as well. But yeah, I think this film is fantastic. Nicolas Cage plays Elvis literally in this film. The accent is almost like the chemistry is unreal in this film as well between the two leads. From the right off, the rock music I think is just stands out in those kind of party scenes as well. We kind of see a lot of Lynch's signature dissolves in this film, which I've mentioned because that's one of his best techniques. I think there's more nods to Twin Peaks, like things like One-Eyed Jacks in this film, which is mentioned, which is a pub, like a club in Twin Peaks as well, which obviously they're kind of filmed at the same time. around that same period in the early 90s. Yeah, I think that the ending works so well. Kind of just from a character standpoint, because I'd honestly forgotten the ending before the last time I'd seen it. But yeah, it works so well. Like, use of color in this is fantastic. The kind of the overuse of blood and the makeup is done so well. I think this is some of the best costumes in a Lynch film as well. I have such a good time with this film. It's such a kind of a step in a great direction for a romance story, like Ryan said, especially for this time, and very, very underappreciated in his filmography. I think it gets really, really overshadowed across a lot of different projects, honestly. Yeah, and it has a slight Western feel to it, this film. I don't know why. Upon rewatch, I kind of noted that down. I feel like it does at times. But yeah, this is, for me, 4.5. Definitely, I absolutely love this film. I have such a good time with it. Sits low in my Lynch ranking, but 4.5 low. That's any director would love that, really. But yeah, that's just Lynch for you. Alex?
Yeah, so Wild at Heart was the second David Lynch film that I ever saw. I saw it when the Film Forum did a series on road movies, and the first time I saw this film, I absolutely loved it. Like, I really loved the rock and roll energy of it, and I loved, just like the curiosity of what's going on as the story's unfolding. Unfortunately, this is a film that has gone down every single rewatch, and I've seen it 3 times in theaters now and then once at home preparing for this episode, and unfortunately, it's not, it's no longer my favorite Lynch. Was never my favorite, but it's no longer one I hold as highly as I did on a first watch. I think, like I said, Lynch, there's always that curiosity, but I feel like with this one, once the curiosity goes away, it kind of doesn't fall flat on rewatches. It just doesn't keep me as engaged as it once did. And there's things I love. Like, I love the color flashes. I think the performances are great. Laura Dern and Nick Cage have great chemistry. Defoe's performance is great, and I love the way they kind of introduce Defoe by drawing your eyes to the obese women who are wearing bright colors, and then he kind of walks up from the shadow. And you don't notice them at first. I think, like, that's just a great character introduction. But yeah, like I said, great energy and curiosity on a first watch, but his kind of, I don't know, this one just more falls flat to me compared to a lot of his other ones, and unfortunately has not held up as good for me on rewatches. But yeah, that's really all I have to say. Like I said, it now unfortunately sits at the bottom of my Lynch ranking. Still 4 stars. Like, I still think it is a good movie. It's just not quite what it used to be. But yeah, now we can move on to a Lynch that I feel, like I said, this one has gone, Wild at Heart has gone down on every rewatch, but now we can talk about one that has gone up every rewatch, which I didn't love as much on a first watch, but now it's come to be one I love very much, and that is Lost Highway. So Seth, take us away.
Yeah, so I speak about Lost Highway quite a lot. This is my favorite Lynch by quite a good margin. This is my number one. I think Lost Highway embodies every element of why Lynch is so good as not only a storyteller but an artist. I think it is just so. First of all, the mystery side of it. We've got many elements in there, and I think Lynch, where he really defines himself as a director, is his capture of the faint line between real and the illusion, real and the fake, real and the dream, and really putting you in this fever-like dream state, which we obviously get in Lost Highway in both periods, in the first half and in the second half with the different characters, and understanding and picking up the pieces. I think what you said, Alex, is perfect, because this is the film for me that gets better. I've seen it like 3 times this year. It gets better for me on multiple watches because there are so many things you can pick up and put 2 and 2 together. But I also think at the same time, I get a lot of messages about, like, a film like Lost Highway, about what does it mean? Obviously, we know that in Lost Highway, there's obviously the themes of identity crisis and of the world, and also the repressed sexual nature of, obviously, our main character, which we see in the second half, which, you can think of what you want, but I see it as more of an illusion, more of a dream, and the repressed sexual nature and the kind of, what's the main character called again? Patricia Arquette's character in the second half.
She's Renee, and then she
She
becomes
becomes
Alice.
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 So the kind of sexual nature, the objectifying female nature in that half compared to his partner in the first half, and the repressed sexual nature there. And we can kind of bring ourselves to interpret things in another way. But I also think with this film, this kind of is the perfect, who cares what it fucking means, man? Like, who actually, like, gives a shit? You know what I mean? It's so much fun. It's so, like, it's so, the soundtrack's amazing. It's erotic, it's sexy, it's dirty, it's disgusting, it's scary, especially when you've got characters like the mystery man, you know, a figment of our main character's imagination, portraying what is bad in the world and also getting him over this obsessive state that he's in. And I think it works on such a level where I get why people don't like it, you know, especially within the middle, it does get a little bit confusing, but that's like the fucking point of it. You know what I mean? Like, you don't understand it. Neither does anyone else. Neither does Lynch probably at this point. It's just putting things together, having a mystery, applying that, and finding things that you can find on multiple watches. I also think this has one of the best endings ever. I think the ending of this fucking film, and like going back to the identity front, what I just spoke about, it really draws a parallel to that, to the start of the film in the middle, where we see the kind of the switching pattern, the switching character. Where they're going back and forth when he's being chased. I think it's one of the best endings ever, and never fails to get me on my feet. But yeah, I think certain events ring true. You know, you can kind of spot yourself or identify yourself or believe which events you think ring true in the film, which you think happens. You know, maybe did he actually kill her? Is he actually in prison? Is this character real? Is the mystery man real? Is it a pure figment of imagination? Whatever it might be. But it kind of, Lynch allows the pieces to be there and you to pick them up. It's like a half-done puzzle, which doesn't really have an end goal. There is so much to it that you'll never really finish that puzzle. You can just make, you know, points in your mind. But yeah, I think this is a perfect film, 5 out of 5. My number one, Lynch. Also in my top 10 favorite films ever. So I love it, and I could watch it over and over again, definitely.
Yeah, just exactly like what you said. Like, you don't have to understand everything that happens. Like, there's that line in the film, like, I like to remember things my own way, how I remembered them, not necessarily how they happened. And I think that sums up Lynch's ideology about film just in general. Like, he wants you to experience the film your own way and take away your own experience. Like, your experience can be vastly different from another person. Everybody's different, and revealing that true meaning kind of would take it away, and it would probably never live up to the actual, like, thing that you would have in your head. Yeah, it's just, this whole film is just so unapologetically like Lynchian, and I love it so much. It's such a great film. Like, it's like it's mysterious, it's erotic, it's terrifying at times. Like, the first 40 minutes is like the closest I've seen to just like a pure like David Lynch horror film, I think.
There's some scary shit in the first 40 minutes. So there actually is.
Yeah.
Like, some of the like scenes where he currently flashes when they're in bed with the face, like, it's actually quite scary. He generally got me on a first watch and makes you feel the most uncomfortable, other than maybe Inland Empire, which obviously we'll get into. That's just fucking a whole other beast. But yeah, definitely agree 100%.
Yeah, it may be a perfect 40 minutes of film, I think. Like, I felt that first half is just so good.
Do you mean a perfect 2 hours, 10 minutes of film?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. I love that switch up that it happens after it as well. Like, I love when films do that. Like, the best I've seen it doing it is like Hitchcock, for example. Like, obvious example, like being Psycho, or like De Palma, who copied Hitchcock quite a lot. They applied this technique in like films like The Sisters, or horror films and Sisters, or like Dressed to Kill. Like, all these films where you're kind of introduced to like the supposed protagonist, and then the kind of like bang, like it switches up completely and you're following somebody else. Like, such an interesting way of like structuring a film, I think.
Barbarian, another great
Oh, yeah.
example.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, the first time I watched it, I actually wasn't sure about it because I thought it'd maybe lose me at that point because of how perfect those first 40 minutes were. But I think I might even prefer the second half to the first.
Interesting.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's kind of like David Lynch's like the Wizard of Oz influences again. Like there, like you said, it's kind of like a dream. Like him meeting these double gangers in real life. Yeah, so I think that may be right. But yeah, this is definitely up there. It's a very, very, very high 4.5 for me. It probably will become a 5 on my next rewatch. It's top 3, but it definitely could go up from there. I love this film so much.
Nice.
Oscar?
Yeah, so for me, this film was the third Lynch that I watched, I think. But this is the film that absolutely turned the tide for me and my opinion of Lynch, and it kind of got me on board the most. Yeah, I've seen this film 3 times this year as well, and it was always a 5 out of 5, but it's just gone even further up that now. It's definitely one of my favorite films ever, and it also is my number one Lynch as well. I think it's absolutely his magnum opus. Like you guys have said, it's just everything he does so well, balanced to a T. Um, the first 40 minutes just terrifying. The lighting I think is brilliant. You get kind of the openings with kind of the red lighting. I think our protagonist is fascinating in the sense of like music and things like that, and he just does such a good job in that opening of telling us nothing but also telling us so much at the same time. um yeah, that the scenes with the face in the bed, like he's done things like that before with like the face, and he does it in Twin Peaks: The Return. It's terrifying. Just like the CGI is obviously not amazing, but it's just so uncanny valley that it's ridiculous. Um, you get kind of the scene in the opening 40 minutes, I think, with like that Fred walks down like that dark hallway. You just can't see the end of it all. That just terrifies me every single time I watch that. Um, love the duality in this film. Like we see it a lot in this film, like the use of doppelgangers. Like we see it in Mulholland Drive as well. But yeah, uh, I love I just love the idea of duality. I think it works so well, not just in like Lynch films, but I think across all films really. But you there's kind of like used motifs of like voices that you can't see and like tape recordings that I think really add to the mystery as well, especially in that first half that we kind of see picked up in the end again. And yeah, there's like point that I'm thinking is almost a circular narrative by the end, because there's that scene where he like buzzes the door and he says like Dick Laurent is dead, which is exactly what he hears in the opening of his film over it is like doorbell thing, which I think is just done so well. And Patricia Arquette definitely does a lot of things to me, and I think a lot of people, everyone who's watched that knows that.
True.
Uh, is ridiculous. But yeah, I think we again see kind of Lynch's love for like flashing lights, and in particular like blue flashing lights we see in this film, and a lot of that plays a massive part in Twin Peaks. Actually, in this idea of like the static TV, he uses those kind of shots a lot in this, and in Twin Peaks that plays kind of a big part of why I think a lot of his films are so meta and people kind of don't realize it. But yeah, that blue flashing light kind of adding to that idea a lot. But yeah, this is a film as it's just absolutely up there as one of my favorite films ever. It's just so enjoyable. Like I said with Wilder Heart, the soundtracks, like the rock soundtracks, just so out of pocket sometimes. But I just think it's absolutely brilliant. And once again, we see like the crazy male characters like we see in like Blue Velvet with Frank, with I've forgotten his name in this one actually, but yeah, his character here, like Alice's
Right.
entrance in the second half of this film, every time I watch it, man, it's so good. The
Yeah.
slow mo.
True.
Yeah, Alex.
Yeah, Lost Highway is one where I think if 100 people watch this film, you're gonna see 100. They're gonna people have watched 100 different films. It's different depending on who watches it. You're all gonna see it very differently. But like we've all been saying, that the first 40 minutes is the most thrilling film experience I've ever had in my life. I've seen this film twice in theaters now and twice at home, and just no matter what, that even though now I've seen it multiple times, it's still just so chilling every time I watch it, with his sound design, his darkness, the kind of emptiness in the set design, and the way the colors are bold but dark at the same time. And just the tapes and this idea of like being watched inside of your home in a place of safety, along with the kind of obstruction that the VHS tape creates, where it's not very clear and you can't really see it. And the way he starts, like he cuts in very close into the TV screen where you can only see a section of it, and it limits your view, just makes you really uneasy in terms of the curiosity of what you're not seeing and what's going on around. And it's just perfect on every level, those first 40 minutes, which also includes, I think, one of the best sex scenes I've ever seen in film, where, obviously we have a lot of sex scenes across film, which is more kind of like just soft porn and just there for the sake of having a sex scene. But here, there's real psychology to it and real story beats, and just the way her hand like pats him on the back with like this sense of pity really it lets you know so much about the character's motivation and how he puts it in there not for the sake of getting the audience worked up, more just it actually has a place in the psychology of the characters and their motivations. And this is coming it was made in 1997, coming off of the OJ trial, which Lynch has said was kind of an influence in terms of the story, where the idea of, obviously that's kind of clear in terms of the idea of killing his wife and inside their own home in the place of safety. And, then it becomes, Lynch was fascinated with the OJ trial, where with this idea of, once you've done something that horrific, how do you then live with yourself and how do you go on living and accepting what you've done? And it really becomes, this creating a false reality to kind of deal with the actions of what he's done. And we really see the most free, unfiltered portrayal of Lynch as an artist here, where it's really just, it's called Lost Highway. And it's really just like the highway of the mind and stream of consciousness and not knowing where it's going to take you. And also kind of the fear of mind exploration, because Lynch is a very psychological director who his ideas come from deep meditation and exploring his own mind. And when you really start to explore the mind, it can take you in very dark and frightening places. And Lost Highway is certainly that, where he didn't put any form of restrictions on, story structure or needing to end here. It really is just letting the mind roam free. And sometimes it's going to take you to dark and frightening places, which we absolutely see here. And, I also think, it's then there's the idea of cameras here, which really represent reality, and how Lynch has said in interviews, if you were to see a camera recording of any of your memories, any human being, it's going to be different from how you remember it. And we see early on, Bill Pullman's character says, I like to remember things my own way. That's why we don't have any security. And then at the very end, with the evil guy who represents evil, putting that camera on him and now making him accept the truth of what he's done. And it's also, I think it's interesting here, just the kind of page versus picture, where if you read this as a script and you see like Mr. Eddie, who's like this lunatic evil character, and he's like, are you going to obey the laws of traffic and like, stop tailgating? Like, if you read it on the page, it sounds insane. And then only David Lynch can direct that dialogue in a way where you're not like ready to walk out of the theater. And I think the score is one of the best in any David Lynch movie. I think, just like Oscar talked about, the introduction of Alice with the slow motion and the music. It's just as perfect of an introduction as it gets. And, I think, like I said, every David Lynch film is a puzzle, and I encourage people to not watch explain videos and just rewatch it and kind of put the pieces together themselves, which is why this film has gone up for me on every rewatch, because like I said, I love the first 40 minutes every watch, but the first two watches, it kind of, once you get into the second half, I was more like, all right, well, it just doesn't make any sense to me. Like, there's parts I like, but I'm just more lost and confused. And as you start to put the pieces together, it really is a big part of what makes it a fun experience, is kind of figuring it out on your own. So, I really encourage people to, if, like I said, David Lynch is a director who his films are meant to be rewatched, and it's not like a Marvel movie, let's say, where you can just watch it one time and that's like you got your experience. Even if you don't get it and it isn't something that necessarily was a film that spoke to you on a first watch, I think if you give David Lynch films multiple chances, you'll discover new things on every rewatch and really start to appreciate them more, which is why this film has now gone up to number 3 on my David Lynch ranking, also at a 5-star, and I think it is just one of the best pieces of art that we've seen him direct. And I love surrealism, so that's another element I love. So, Lost Highway is a film that is, very dark at times, very free form, abstract, and really takes you to some crazy places. And then he follows that up with the pretty much essential opposite of that, with the most contained, simple, and kind of positive, bright story that he's ever done with The Straight Story. So, Seth, what are your thoughts on The Straight Story?
Yeah, so with these next two films, these are the ones I'm gonna have to take a sit back from. I've actually removed my ratings for both of them recently, just because it's been 3 years minimum. But I mean, The Straight Story again just highlights Lynch's range and his capabilities as a director. You know, he's not only a surrealist, he also works with these tender stories, such as we see with The Elephant Man. It's very similar in terms of a linear pattern it follows. I also think it's emotional, but it also has the dark and grounded elements as well. And again, it's a film which I mentioned with The Elephant Man should come across as melodramatic. You know, if you read the script of this film, you'd probably think, like it sounds alright, just a bit preachy maybe, but I think Lynch deals with it from what I remember in a really well state. I mean, I can't say too much right now. This sits second to last in my rankings, but I remember really liking it. I just don't remember how much exactly. So I'll let you guys kind of take this one.
Yeah, it's not my favourite Lynch by any means, but I think it still holds quite a special place in his filmography because it does show how great of a range he does have as a director. It's kind of an embodiment of his personality in real life. It's kind of just like the sweetest, most wholesome film you ever see. It's obviously a big surprise when you go to watch it and you see that he's made a Disney film. It just goes against like everything that you would expect if you've seen his other films. And this is like kind of nothing like his other films really. There's no abstract like surrealist nature to this film. It's kind of exactly what the cover, or it is exactly what the cover says. Like it's a very simple story of a man going on a straight journey to see his brother, and I think it does have some elements of his other like projects. Like I think it does have like that kind of more upbeat nature of like early Twin Peaks with like the quirky dialogue and characters that we've seen even some of his other films as well. And yeah, he's always been so great at taking characters and like kind of showing or bringing to the forefront their humanity and like making us feel attached to them, like the Elephant Man or the baby in Eraserhead. There's just like stuff like that. Like he's so good at showing like the emotion behind characters. I think it's no different here. Like it's a very simple story, but he still does a great job of transforming it into something so like humane and impactful and so cinematic, really. And whether that's through like the old man's like struggles on his journey to his brother or just the people that he like meets on the way, like it's all done very well. It does have like a G rating, so it doesn't go any further than that into the realm of like stuff we'd expect from Lynch, but I think it's still like a really unique feature in his career, so I still really like it. It's a 4 out of 5. It's towards the bottom of my ranking. I have a 8th, so second, no, yeah, second bottom from what I've seen, not including Twin Peaks. So yeah, I still really like it. Oscar?
Yeah, I'm around the same board as you. I have this at a 4 out of 5 as well, and this sits yeah, 9th out of 10 for me. So yeah, one off the bottom. But yeah, this is again just showcasing Lynch as a genre master again. I think it's just so linear and straightforward, like in story, but like straight as in like transport as well, and in the title is just one of the most wholesome films ever. Really, it's just such a nice film to watch. Just to sit back and relax, kind of put a smile on your face almost. But yeah, I haven't got like a ton to say on this because yeah, I didn't rewatch this one. But yeah, I just it's just such a nice happy tale, and I think is Harry Dean Stanton in this one?
He is, yeah.
Yeah. I forgot to add just because like he's in a lot of Lynch films as well. Him as an actor, I just think adds so much. He's kind of one of those actors for me that just like elevates a film whenever he's in it. I love him as an actor so much. Like I said, he's in a lot of other Lynch projects. He's in Firewalk with Me as well. I think he's really good in this. I just enjoy his kind of laid back tone as an actor. That kind of comes from Paris, Texas, because obviously that's like my second favorite film ever. But yeah, I enjoy this film a really good amount. Solid 4 out of 5 for me. I don't think it will go any higher for me, but yeah, I just it's just such a nice film, man. So good.
Yeah, so Before I tell the story of the first time I saw the Straight Story, I want to say that I do not condone phone use in the theater. I think you should never use a phone in the theater. However, when I first saw this film, I saw a double header of this and Wild at Heart. And right after watching Wild at Heart, I sat in the theater for the Straight Story, knowing nothing about it. And I see Disney up on the screen. I'm like, wait, what? Disney? David Lynch? So I'm convinced that I'm in the wrong theater. I'm like, there's no way I'm in the wrong theater. Like there's no way David Lynch did a movie for Disney. So I did pull I listen, I kept it down. There was no one near me. I don't condone taking out a phone in the theater, but I literally thought I was in the wrong theater. So I look it up and then I see rated G. And I'm like, wait, David Lynch made it after watching Wild at Heart, like the most sexually charged, like hard R movie. I then see a rated G Disney movie that David Lynch did. So I'm like, I don't know what the fuck I'm in for. And yeah, it just shows his versatility as an artist because it's such a wholesome movie and it's so after Lost Highway, such a complex film, this one is just so insanely simple and just with nice little wholesome moments like when the girl leaves the bundle of sticks for him and and just this determination throughout the entire film. And I think the score drives a lot of the heart of the film for sure. And he tells the story so simply but brilliantly, like in the beginning when he has a stroke and falls, and no one ever says that, this guy is older and getting towards the end of his life, but it's just very clear from the stroke and what we see visually that, his days are numbered. And then they get the phone call about his brother, and in that scene, we just see the light coming through the window on him of the rain dripping down the window. And he doesn't cry as a character, but David Lynch uses his skills as a painter just to have the kind of rain through the window symbolically cry through the image rather than seeing him cry himself, which I just think is brilliantly poetic. And then yeah, he goes on this quest and it's pretty simple from there. I think one major moment, of course, is when we hear about the daughter's backstory and see who we thought was like a simple, kind of not maybe not the most intelligent character, has this dark and really kind of disturbing backstory in terms of her losing her children, which is very sad. And yeah, the ending is just one of his most powerful endings. Nothing really needs to be said, and it's just he just asks one question, like you drove that thing here, and that's really it. Not much words need to be said, and just the actions and the determination and the fact that he went through this journey on one of the most difficult ways possible just adds so much weight to it when he gets there, rather than if he had accepted the ride from that one guy, it would have had such a different effect than seeing him pull up on a lawnmower to travel this long distance. So, yeah, not much to really dive into and break down here. It's not like one of his puzzle movies, and definitely pretty much the opposite of Lost Highway, but such a wholesome and heartfelt film with one of his most powerful endings. But now we can move on to a film that I think is far superior to everything else he's done, and pretty much everything else, far superior to most films that have existed ever, and that is Mulholland Drive. So, Seth, take us away.
Yeah, so this is the one of the main ones I haven't revisited in quite some time. Mulholland Drive is interesting. I think it's probably his most renowned work, his most popular work probably ever, and for good reason. I think it, similar to what we were saying with Blue Velvet, it effectively kind of recreates this kind of fantastical world in the first half, and it's almost like this dreamlike scenario, Hollywood dreamlike, what we see in usual films, kind of a melodramatic dreamlike nature, but then it quickly unravels into the nightmare of that, and the nightmare of pursuing a certain dream and struggling with your identity within that society. And I also think, from what I remember, obviously it's been a while, I've seen the film like twice or three times, but it's just been 2 or 3 years. So I think the real carrier of this film for me is Naomi Watts as an actor. I think she's that good in this role. It's one of probably my favorite, not only female-led performances, but performances in general. I think she perfectly captures the optimistic state within the first half and the kind of nightmarish feel within not only her speeches, but also her facial structure, impediments, or expressions. I also think this has, as everyone always speaks about, some of the one of the most intense sequences ever in terms of the diner sequence. Is just so incredible, so amazing. I really need to revisit it. I don't know why I haven't visited in some time, but I think it's just a kind of a Hollywood fable quickly turned dark, similar to what we've seen from him before in the way that he presents, juxtaposed between the first half of Blue Velvet and the last half with the opening scene, as Alex said, and the ending. But yeah, I need to rewatch this one because it's been a while, so I'll let you guys kind of speak a little bit more about it than me. I currently have it like 4th, which is, I guess, kind of a rough guess because I think this could either be much higher or much lower. It would take a lot to dethrone Lost Highway, but I imagine if I rewatch this, could probably end up in like 2nd, just above The Elephant Man, just below Lost Highway. But yeah, it's been a while, to be honest. It's been a while.
Yeah, I definitely think it'd be up there if you rewatched it. This is my favourite Lynch. I actually seen this in theatres 2 weeks ago, which was just completely different. Seeing it in a theatre, that was my first Lynch. Yeah, it is one that, like, I think all the elements of his films just perfectly come together in this one, like creating that balance of that Lynchian fever dream while still providing like this like captivating narrative that is so thematically rich. I think I slightly prefer it over Lost Highway just because I think instead of more, there's a lot of stuff left to you in Lost Highway, whereas this one I think has stuff that there is there. We're talking about there is like straight themes that are there on purpose and quite obvious. Particularly, I just love films about making films, and it really does dive like into the dark side of Hollywood. And I just find that side so interesting. So yeah, there's so many great moments in this film. Like this is one of my favorite movies of all time. But like that director subplot in it is so great. Like and he doesn't have full control of his movie in Mulholland Drive, and like he isn't allowed to pick who wants to be the lead actress. And I think this is such great commentary on just like what Lynch has experienced throughout his career, like with just the obvious ones really Dune and Twin Peaks being the standouts. Like any director that doesn't have full control over like their vision is like gonna have the movie completely altered. But especially with Lynch, like they're so unique and strange that if he doesn't have full control, like it's not gonna reach that like true like Lynchian experience. And I think obviously like Dune and Twin Peaks at times were completely ruined because he didn't have full control. So it's just great, like just great themes about that in general. Just diving into that side of Hollywood. One of the best scenes as well, like you talked about, that diner scene when they're having breakfast, and it just keeps cutting to the guy talking about his dream, and like see the kind of camera like peeking over the window constantly. It's peeking over the edge of the windowsill, teasing us about what's in the back of the diner, as he tells us about this nightmare, and then it just kind of almost enters his dream. It's such a cool transition as the guy kind of appears at the cash register, and then comes the long and just agonizing tension-filled walk over to this edge of the wall, and then bam, he hits you with probably one of the best jump scares I've ever seen. It was multiplied by 10 seeing this in a theatre because the sound is so important to his films. Like it was so loud, and it is one of the most terrifying scenes I've ever seen, I think. Even though you know what's coming, like you're just frozen waiting for it to happen. It's an amazing scene. There's also just so many like great comedic moments in this film as well, like when the hitman goes to kill the guy and then he accidentally shoots through the wall and hits the assistant, and then it just becomes this big long scene where he's having to kill everybody that comes and witnesses him killing the last person before them. There's so many great moments in this film. But yeah, this is a 5 out of 5 for me. It sits at the top of my Lynch ranking. Probably like top 20 films of all time for me. I love this film so much.
I think it's interesting we said about like compared to Inland Empire in Mulholland Drive, he kind of puts those pieces together that are missing. But this was kind of the turning point, I believe, for Lynch when it comes to critical reception for a lot of people as well. Like Roger Ebert, for example, this was like the first film he really actually praised in any way. He was very heavy, and a lot of critics were on Lost Highway, on Wild at Heart, on films of that nature. But it is funny how Mulholland Drive is so similar to his previous work, but also dissimilar way where he puts the pieces together. And I do find it interesting how this is like his most praised, and going on from there, just because it's so similar whilst also making those changes needed to apply to appeal to a more general audience as well. I think that's what Mulholland Drive excels at. So yeah, I think this is kind of where Lynch, from a critical standpoint, became more of a a renowned director. I think Mulholland Drive was like his big thing. It's a shame he's only done 2 films since then, I think. Wait, when was Twin Peaks? 2017.
It was before it.
Oh no,
2017.
I always think the film for Twin Peaks was 2017. That was the 3rd season.
That was early.
Yeah, the 3rd season was 2017.
And the film was like 92, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was 92. Yeah.
One. Okay, so fucking hell, man, it's been a long time. Inland Empire was 2006, maybe Inland Empire.
2004. 2005, I think. Yeah, it's around that time. Oh, so it was. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, 2006.
17 that he did The Return, but yeah, only one actual feature film.
And then he did the like a short on Netflix last year, whatever.
The Monkey.
Oh, it's so good, though.
It is good. Yeah, I did.
There's just, then you get like teasers on like social media of like, oh, like there's like a listing somewhere. People think this is a Lynch project.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate. None of them are true ever.
I know. It pains my heart every time someone debunks it, man.
Definitely.
It's just
Secret
one
film
more.
was released at Cannes.
Yeah.
There's a rumor he was going to release a secret movie he'd been working on at Cannes. It never happened.
Just well after either.
Oscar?
Yeah, so this film I saw for the first time just over a year ago now. This is my first Lynch. I've seen this film twice since. I gave it a 3.5 on first watch. Again, like I've said, there's been a massive turning point since. Thanks. This is absolutely 5 out of 5 for me. Sits number 2 in my rankings now. Has gone up a good chunk of my rankings since I rewatched it last week. Actually, I still had it at a 5 out of 5 though. Yeah, this film is just absolutely brilliant. I think among his confusing films, this is the one I feel I have the best grasp on, which maybe hints at its popularity, maybe because I feel like there's a massive sense of confusion there. There's a lot of side plots in this film that I think kind of weirder, don't give us like a good understanding or have like a maybe like a coherent explanation than kind of the main idea of the film does, obviously, because for most people, kind of the explanation of this film is that the first 2/3 is like a dream sequence, and the last sequence is kind of that punch of reality, I guess, and it's kind of showcasing what I kind of mentioned at the start about Eraserhead, this kind of idea of the fake American dream, which I think works so well in this because it's not night and day in this film. There are, without maybe like a couple of YouTube videos, I'm going to be honest, I have watched, I still wouldn't have a massive understanding of kind of what is dream and what is reality, honestly. And like some people might not even realize that there's dream and reality in this, which I think it works so well for his style. Especially, yeah, the Naomi Watson is just absolutely brilliant. I like how as the film goes on, it kind of thins the line between this duality kind of as the film moves on. Obviously, well, as we know at the start, Diane, obviously that's kind of different by the end. She puts on that blonde wig, and it's kind of thinning this line as the film goes on of kind of merging this dream and reality, especially with the blue box, which I think works really well. We get that amazing scene in the theater with those flashing blue lights, which I've mentioned earlier, one of Lynch's main techniques, which I think again, one of his most meta techniques, because I think it kind of reflects like people watching themselves almost like on a TV screen, which I think is where it comes from, honestly. But yeah, I think Adam, the director, I think his character, I think the way he gets treated in this film is hilarious, the scenes that he has to go through. But I feel so sorry for him a lot of the time. But yeah, that kind of the several diner scenes in the film, like you guys have mentioned, that jump scare I still have to cover my face for. Honestly, I every time it gets me, and it's like it's the most obvious thing. Like something's gonna pop out there because the shot just lingers and then it kind of just finally happens. But it still terrifies me. And again, his use of dissolves in this and work a tree, especially can kind of his dissolves and his use of curtains, I think works so well, kind of exploring the thinning of like fantasy and reality, especially works really well in this film, which I think I think kind of across all his films, the use of like the curtains, obviously a curtain's a really thin thing that you can just walk through easy. I think that's a great kind of metaphor of like the kind of almost closeness of reality and fantasy as kind of a film goes on, and especially that's really relevant in kind of a lot of his other films. But yeah, again, impressive use of color. The blue box, there's like obviously this film is quite big neo-noir, and there's just so many lighting choices that I think are brilliant. I think the opening scene is incredible as well. Just the shot of the Mulholland Drive sign with just the single lighting on that street lamp Street Lamp, Street Sign, sorry, I think just works so well. And every rewatch I have this film, it just exceeds my expectations of my previous watch somehow, and it's just so good. So yeah, on to you, Alex.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack with this film. It's not only one of my favorite films ever, I think it's the best film of the 21st century. I think there's just so many layers to it. And like Oscar said, I think the puzzle pieces this one are more clear than the film like Lost Highway, let's say. But yeah, I mean, so David Lynch and me both have a lot of the same favorite other filmmakers. Like a lot of the filmmakers who have had a big influence on me have had a big influence on him. Mainly with, he's a big fan of Kubrick and Billy Wilder, especially Sunset Boulevard, with, both of them opening up with a street sign in LA. And this is kind of him mixing that with my favorite director, Federico Fellini, who Lynch is a big fan of and has been compared as kind of like an American Fellini, who Fellini in the second half of his career is famous for his surrealism. And I love how David Lynch takes like a Billy Wilder dark side of Hollywood film like Sunset Boulevard and mixes it with a more like surrealist element by telling a story of the Hollywood dream in the style of an actual dream. And it's just on so many levels, like there's just so much to unpack here. Like I love the opening, the purely cinematic opening of this film without any words of, first it's darkness, and then we see glimpses of purple, and then a bunch of dark figures kind of become visible in the frame. We're like silhouetted in the jitterbug contest. And then through all the dark figures, one super bright light shines as Betty, who is the star of likely like Small Town. And she's there with like the older couple who are the ones who send her to Hollywood. And then after they drop her off at the airport, after she just shines brightest as the star and goes to Hollywood to chase that dream. And then after that, the way that they just are smiling in the car after is just so unsettling. And there is like a comedically evil feeling that we get from them because they're the ones who send her on this to Hollywood, which creates this downward spiral. And then right away, when we get into like the opening credits with Mulholland Drive as a street, this dark, windy road, and the car's dark, the color palette of the image is just so dark as like this dark path into Hollywood that we're going on with, that glossy David Lynch texture that it has to it. And then, I love the kind of cutaway. Like I said, David Lynch will kind of lay things out and make you curious and let you put the pieces together yourself, which I love. And especially one of my favorite scenes of the film is right in the beginning where Rita's driving in the car, and we just see the two other cars just going super fast on these windy roads, and we don't know why we're cutting away to it until the collision happens. And he's just giving you the images and letting you connect the dots on your own. And after that, we have, the breathing sounds as we move in. Like I said, the David Lynch theme of moving into things, and in this film, it's the cube later, but also we move inside the pillow, which on a rewatch you realize shows that that is, what we're watching is essentially a dream. And I just love, all the one-off characters. And, I think, like I said, now getting more into the Hollywood side of things, where, David Lynch has experienced what it's like to lose control of your film with Dune. And we definitely see that with the character of Adam, with him losing control of his film. And then after that, there's that scene with the cowboy where now we know that he is not going to get to choose who the lead of his film is. And then right after that, we see the Hollywood sign as a transition. And the next, extended sequence, 10, 20 minutes, whatever it is of the film, is all about, a day in the life of the casting process through Betty. And, now we're watching her go through the motions as we know the corruption of the process. And, we see her in that first audition. And then after that, when they're all excited, then we hear them talk about it, like, the picture's never going to get made. And, we see kind of a much more like sad and darker truths of the industry. And then after that, we see an audition, which is much more grand and big with a bunch of cameras and set design. And I think this is actually the music. One of my favorite scenes of the film is that audition. And we have, both the songs are very reflective, I think, of what's going on, because we see the first girl, and the song is, 16 Reasons, which the lyrics are 16 Reasons Why I Love You. And I think that's reflective because that one is, this is the actress he really wants and thinks is right for the part. and it's this slow romantic song. And then after that, we have, I've Told Every Little Star, and that one is about, after he tells the actress who he wants, and she's really wants the role. Then after that, we have a song that's him talking about how he's telling them all that, they have a chance, when really it's all fake. None of them actually have any chance of getting this role because of the corruption within the process. And, just the look between Adam and Betty where no words are said, and it's just so perfect at letting you know that, he sees her as the star. She's the one he really wants for this film, I think is perfect. But when he says this is the girl, and the one executive, there's the guy who says, like, is there anything you want to tell me, Adam? And the guy slides out behind. That motion for me, I think, really mirrors the homeless guy earlier at the diner, where he slides out in the same motion. And I think what makes that the homeless guy scene so frightening is kind of the unsettling and like unnatural way he slides out, but also at a close distance. I know I'm getting into a different scene, but I think that maybe I'm wrong, but I think David Lynch is drawing a connection there between the evil that the homeless guy represents and evil of this powerful executive who's corrupting the process. And I think, the diner scene's obviously very like chilling every single time you watch it. And, and then another scene actually I want to touch on real quick that I love is the scene where Adam catches his wife cheating. And you have Billy Ray Cyrus there who's like, it's okay, like pretend you didn't see it, it's better that way. But then when Adam leaves the room, he like doubles down on like this super like calm understandingness. Like he's upset, like, and I just think it's hilarious. But also just how Adam says no words in the entire scene, and we're curious. We're like, what's he doing? Like, where's he going? And he just takes out the jewelry and the paint. And it's just such a creative, purely visual form of revenge that was unlike anything I've seen. And it's just so David Lynch. But yeah, and then back to the puzzle, we see eventually, once we move out of the dream, a lot of doppelgangers, and we start to see, it's how real life makes its way into your dreams, and we start recognizing people at the party, and there's just so many things you start to perform on rewatches to put pieces of the puzzle together. And, I think, also there's David Lynch is someone who his philosophy on writing is not the same as someone, the more traditional writers in the Hollywood formulas. He doesn't care about formulas, and it's very much rooted in ideas. When you hear a David Lynch interview, everything he does is all about, ideas flow. He doesn't even take credit for his genius because he says, the idea just happened to come to him. It's the idea, and you don't know how it comes. They just almost flow through you, and that's really what guides his thought process about the film is, just catching ideas and just exploring them and seeing where he goes with them, and leaving room to dream at the end. But yeah, and then the music, of course, is great, and the sound design. Like I said, I love the one musical scene of the audition, but also he plays around with these really strong, steady rhythms, like the scene in Adam's house, and then some of the more romantic scenes where the score is like almost goes in waves of volume and like up and down. So just kind of a variety, but he also slows the music down to an insane degree where he takes already slow music and plays it at, I think, a quarter speed. So it's like this long, drawn out, like white noise almost, but also with like musical quality to it, and he plays at a lower volume, but then it's still just so insanely effective. And it's really, like I said, he comes full circle in his career with his exploration of the synchronization of sound and picture at the opera scene, where he really starts exposing the craft of filmmaking with this exposing the synchronization of the sound with that magic trick, and then having Betty shaking, which is just the effect that the illusion can have on the audience. And, there's the opera scene where she's singing and then she passes out and we still hear the voice. And, watching this today, I feel like you could really connect to what we're seeing now with AI and this idea of, the actor and their work living on after they die. The sound is still there, and the likeness is still there, and it's still going to be used by the system. And you could argue that the blue lady, who's like the puppet master, I guess you could say, like the one controlling it, we see her after Betty's shaking and it has this effect on her. And I do think you could connect it to AI with this idea of the sound and the art and what's made here living on after the characters die. And, it's just, there's so many layers to this film. It's just one that it gets better on every rewatch. And it's just a brilliantly poetic film, and is David Lynch is everything he's learned in all these years of this art form kind of coming full circle. And yeah, I just think it's, my favorite film of the 21st century, along with Babylon. I think it's the best film of the 21st century. And I know it was originally meant to be a series, and I am cannot express in words how thankful I am that it's not a series and it's a movie, because I think it would be a lot worse as a series, because movies are better than shows. And yeah, I'm glad it's
true. I had no idea that was meant to be a show. That's crazy.
Yeah, it didn't get picked up as a show, but he eventually found the funding for the feature film. So he told them it's not going to be a show, but they shot, like, he casted everyone, and then it was like a year and a half before it got greenlit. So it was a long process, but eventually I'm very glad that it worked out the way it did, because I think it resulted in his best film.
Yeah, I think it's weird, kind of seeing like how popular this film is, and obviously it's his most well known. But yeah, it's like just crazy. Obviously, it's got his signature weirdness and surrealism, but it's weird seeing like him as in like, as obviously this film's not been like received as well as kind of this film, I guess. I think maybe it lies in the fact that this is a bit easier to digest.
So now we're going to get into the final film of David Lynch's filmography. We're all hoping that it won't be the last in his career, but it's been a good over 20 or close to 20 years now. So it's hard to be optimistic, but we're hoping he comes back with another. But he finished up with Inland Empire, definitely his most experimental film and probably the least accessible to general audiences. It's definitely very out there, abstract film. But Seth, take us away. What are your thoughts on Inland Empire?
Yeah, sorry, if you are watching or listening to this right now, you see this structure. I'm on my phone as my Wi-Fi decides to break mid-podcast, so bear with me. Yeah, Inland Empire I watched fairly recently. First time, I want to say like the last 6 months or so was the last first watch I had with the Lynch. I think it's a really, really interesting film because it's almost like an epic of all his elements as a filmmaker. It's about a woman lost in a fugal state. She's starring in this project where she's kind of regaining and gaining her consciousness, and it's about her being in this kind of fantastical world and losing herself within this world. And I think it offers the obvious surreal, dreamlike style that we come to expect from Lynch, whilst also offering up horror, being one of the scariest films, and really emphasizing the dreamlike scenario and having you to understand what is an illusion and what isn't from Laura Dern's perspective as a character, and not only as a character of herself, but as a character in the character she's portraying in the show or film. I can't remember what it is. Also, Laura Dern just completely excels and just gives probably what I would say is my second favorite performance in a Lynch film, probably behind Naomi Watts in Mulholland Drive. It's obviously self-indulgent. It's weird. Again, it's kind of an epic that Lynch wanted to make. And I don't think this is a film where it's like I say about this, a lot of films where one watch isn't enough to warrant a full discussion on it. But I think not even 2 watches is with this one. This is one that needs multiple times and multiple conversations around, because it really does gradually translate after a slower start into full sort of psychological trauma and psychological mayhem of understanding Laura Dern's emotion, understanding her psychological aspects, and understanding what she's seeing, whether it's real or not. Particularly kind of the bulk of the last act, it really just becomes a horrifying and disturbing exercise in tension and psychological mayhem. And I think a film that Lynch always kind of wanted to make as well, with it being around 3 hours, you kind of go into the grips of it. And I do believe it's one of his more polarizing works. They're all polarizing their own way, but this one, especially with the length, not something we seen from Lynch before. I really enjoy it. It's not something that's my favorite by any means, but I have it at 4 out of 5. It currently sits at, I believe, about 6 in my rankings out of 8. So certainly down the lower end, just below Wild at Heart. But by saying that, I still really, really enjoy it. But I think this is one that, like any Lynch, needs multiple watches, but this specifically, I would say it needs 4 or 5 before you can even talk about it, because of its nature, because of its long runtime as well. So yeah, I really like it. Not my favorite, but it's really good film.
Certainly a unique film. Kind of as his first kind of venture into the world of digital filmmaking, it is so unique because of that. Obviously, it's cheaper to shoot on digital than film, and that probably was one of the main reasons for him doing it, because he was at a point in his career once again where he didn't have tons of funding again for his films, and so shooting digitally was kind of the natural progression of that, and it really allowed him to make that kind of 3 hour long movie that he probably wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. Also having a lot of freedom allows him to like get even freakier. See that again in season 3 of Twin Peaks, where he's also shot it digitally. Like, he gets weird and experimental, and he's now at a point where he probably he won't go back to ever shooting in film again, because he doesn't speak on it fondly. It seems like he thinks back of it as quite an annoying experience to use it. Like you said, like Inland Empire's like easily his least accessible, I think. Like, just him fully driving that surrealism and all the Lynchian like weird quirks that come with his films, and he's just putting them up to max, and just for this like 3 hour daydream of like where you don't really know what's going on most of the time. And I'm not going to try and explain what the film means, because it wouldn't do it justice, and frankly I can't, because I've only seen it once. I don't know how many times you'd have to rewatch this to understand it, but this film's certainly an experience for sure. There's not much that actually pushes you towards that kind of like meaning behind the narrative that come with some of his other films. Like, it's kind of just mostly strange moments with meaning that you have to decipher for yourself, and then there's maybe about an hour of like the kind of like main narrative behind the film. So there's not much to go along with. But I still really enjoy Inland Empire. Still a 4 out of 5. I love all these films, but this does sit at the bottom of my Lynch ranking, just because it's not one that you would just throw on. You'd have to be in the right mood to watch this film, and so that's why it's at the bottom. But it's still a great film nonetheless. Oscar?
Yeah, this is kind of on the same line, but I actually really love this film. I have this film with a 4.5. I've only seen it once, but yes, it's 8th out of 10 of my Lynch rankings, just got 2 below it. But yeah, I actually really enjoyed this film. I think for me, this is his scariest film, and not only Lynch's scariest film, but I would say this is easily one of the scariest films I've ever seen. There's some absolutely horrifying scenes in this film. And I think he'd been like doing bits on this for a while, because I know he made that the short film Rabbits, which quite like parts of this feature in like I think 3 or 4 years before this was released. So there's kind of lots of bits prior that were going into this that just kind of culminated, and that kind of those scenes with the rabbits in this film they're really scary. Again, kind of I think he uses uncanny valley really well, kind of across all of his films, and this one in particular, with the rabbits, and kind of with those horrifying quick shots of Laura Dern's face straight up, which are forever imprinted into my mind. Every time I see a screenshot of that, it terrifies me to bits. I think it's just so well done in that sense. But there's, like I've mentioned in the past, with kind of the idea of the curtain. It's like this thinning between reality and fantasy. There's no curtain here. You have no idea what's kind of in a dream state of fantasy and what's reality. But this is like Lynch, like you guys say, just Lynch let loose completely. And I think it's great that this film exists, that he had that opportunity to do that in full force. And that's what I appreciate most about this film, is seeing him just unleashing his style in the most overloaded and hyperbolic way possible. But yeah, Laura Dern's performance is absolutely fantastic in this. I haven't had a chance to rewatch this film, but one that I definitely will be. But yeah, for me, it's a fantastic film, but one that I don't understand at all. But yeah, it scared the hell out of me. But yeah, such a great film. Alex?
Yeah, definitely one of his most chilling and kind of frightening films. For me, my favorite part is definitely the rabbits. The first time I saw it, I didn't know that it was a short film he had done before, and kind of recut into this film. So I was just so curious about that, and I had so much curiosity around the rabbits. So every time they got involved, I was just very interested in it, because it's just so bizarre, and especially the way the approach he has to those scenes where like he'll freeze it and have the red and like this kind of semi dissolves where like it's about to dissolve and then it goes away. He uses that a lot in this film. And I think, he does a great job of creating that suspense with like the cuts are very hard cuts with like very hard sound cuts, often like spiking the sound, which is very jarring and just kind of almost like shocking. And he creates so much suspense in this film just from empty spaces. Like the empty spaces are so unsettling. And it's a lower budget resourceful film for Lynch, and just he uses just emptiness to create such chilling feelings. And almost it's a film that it's so abstract, you never know what's going to happen or where the danger is going to come from, like what direction it's going to come from. Kind of like the diner scene in Mulholland Drive, where it's just like this unsettling walking where we don't know where we're going, and like the way the turning corners and going into the room. And a lot of the horror and suspense really comes from the performance from Laura Dern, and just the faces she makes and the kind of terror in her eyes is so incredibly effective. And also just with this like kind of VHS camcorder approach, just the uncomfortable closeness and shooting people close up with a wide lens and just the way it warps and distorts the face is just all unsettling and resourceful ways to make it such a chilling experience on such a low budget. And I mean, the camcorder is hideous. Like we talk about David Lynch as an every frame painting director, and yet this is one of the ugliest films I've ever seen in my life. And only someone like David Lynch could make me want to watch a film this ugly for 3 hours, with like the terribly exposed lighting. And like the darkness isn't even effective because it has that choppy like VHS look to it, so it's not like a real black screen. But he's David Lynch, and is always going to find a way to pull it off. And there's all different pieces, and like this is one I really haven't put the pieces of the puzzle together on my own and quite know what it is that the film's about. Maybe we're not supposed to, I don't know. But I think definitely there's the production, and then the time we start spending away from the cameras, where there's this weird scene where you see this horrified stare from Laura Dern, and then we see what she's looking at, and it's from a distance. It's herself doing a table read with her co-star. And after that, that's when she goes into that like set house, and it really takes a full turn into the surrealism, where the cameras start to disappear and her co-star, except for one scene with his wife, disappears. And it really it starts to get, and then until that final death scene, there's no we don't see the cameras again. And just the way it kind of, we lose almost all sense of time, all sense of reality. And I think a part of it is Lynch commenting on the kind of psychological and emotional toll production can take on an actress. And I still don't really know quite what the film's about, but I think there's a lot of interesting pieces like that, almost interrogation like setup with this random guy and Laura Dern with the beat up face. Then we have the curtain scene with like that reaching red arm and like a POV shot, and then of course the girl who's crying, watching the different episodes on TV with like the Polish guy and the rabbits, and then Laura Dern who eventually breaks the fourth wall. So yeah, just a very frightening kind of chilling experience of a film that a lot of pieces to put together, that is going to take a lot more rewatches for me to give any kind of thoughtful insight on what the film's actually about. But yeah, definitely something only someone like David Lynch could pull off. But now I think we're going to get into we'll quickly get into any just final wrap up thoughts. So Seth, any wrap up thoughts just on David Lynch's filmography as a whole, or him as an artist?
No, not particularly. I think it's like we spoke about earlier when we did the introduction section. It's looking across his filmography kind of amplifies his not only ability as an artist, but his ability to create range as a director. We have films like The Elephant Man, we have The Straight Story, then we also have the really abnormal abstract works that would only, like you said, work for Lynch, like a Inland Empire or like a Eraserhead, where he can put across themes that are abnormal or normal in a sense that they occur in a lot of modern day films, but put across them in such a weird way. That's why I think he's one of the most just intelligent filmmakers ever, because you don't, it's impossible to think how he even conjures up an idea to make Inland Empire. it makes no sense to me how any filmmaker could come up with that. But not only come up with it because anyone could, but that it works in not only an efficient way, but an efficient way working with a lower budget and working with a very ugly film, like Alex said. So yeah, I think you look across his filmography, it only kind of amplifies also the sense of how he is misunderstood. You know, he's not a one-trick pony. He's not just a surrealist author. He is an author in every sense of the way, as an artist, as a director, as a writer. And yeah, I think he's just got one of the strongest filmographies ever, as short as it is. And I wish he'd do, more. Definitely one of my favorites anyway.
It's so strange how such a nice guy creates just these like crazy mindfuck movies. You really wouldn't expect that if you just know him in real life and didn't know about his art. But yeah, he's definitely one of just the most special directors about. Right up there for me. Nobody does it quite like him, and I don't know if anybody could even come close to what he produces with his art. Yeah, just one of the most special to ever do it. Oscar?
Yeah, he's my favorite director. I don't really know what more to add. Like Seth said, an unfortunately short filmography, but one that I hold very dear. Now I rate so many of his films highly. I only have 2 of his films rated below a 4.5, so I think that kind of says a lot. Maybe it's just my rating bias, but I don't think I didn't even rate that highly, to be honest. But yeah, this is kind of the one-off. I just want to see one, like even one more from him, man. That would just be the dream. But yeah, I love him so much. Even as an actor in Twin Peaks, he's one of the best characters in that show. He's so funny as an actor, and I like how much screen time he gives himself in across like the second season and kind of the return as well, and even in Fire Walk with Me, he's just is so funny. He provides so many great comedic moments to the show in that film. But yeah, such a great guy.
Yeah, like I said, it's just so great to see an artist on his level work in the American system, because normally these films are kind of pushed to Europe, but someone in America who's been able to achieve such high art on this level and have mainstream success at the same time is very refreshing to see. And I think the Hollywood system needs people like David Lynch to kind of balance it out. And he's just someone who's had so much influence on me, and I love the way he thinks in terms of ideas and has no regard or care for formulas, and his commitment to music and picture and sound. And I've seen every film of his except for The Elephant Man in theaters, and if anyone watching it ever gets a chance to see a David Lynch film in theaters, I can't recommend it enough, because as much as we talk about theaters as the big screen, the immersive sound landscape is one of the most essential parts of the theater. And David Lynch is such a sound heavy director. It makes such a difference when you get to see a film of his in that immersive landscape. But yeah, he's just someone who's had incredible influence on me and my own work, and someone who, his films have really changed my life and affect them in so many ways. And I actually really want to mention one more thing I forgot to mention. We talked about Lost Highway, is the totally kind of unrelated, but uh, he draws from his own life in a lot of ways, and one of those is that opening scene where they say Dick Laurent is dead in Lost Highway. That actually happened to David Lynch, where his intercom was buzzed in the morning and someone said that. And the setup of his house, he couldn't see outside. So by the time he got to a window, he looked and no one was there. Like, that has got to be the most unsettling. Like he was probably shitting himself. But I just think that's nuts. And the homeless person in Mulholland Drive was also something that happened to him, where he was walking out to a dumpster at a diner and a homeless guy jumped out and scared him. But the whole Dick Laurent is dead thing, I just can't not mention, because that's terrifying. If someone says that in your intercom and you look outside the window and it's just no one there, that's nuts. But now we're gonna get into a David Lynch collaborative ranking to wrap up the episode, where we're all gonna rank 10-1. We're gonna take turns, and we each have one veto. So, does anyone have a draft order?
Just go Alex, Oscar, Seth, and then me. Just go in
Cool.
that order.
All right. So, if
Number 10, Alex.
if I'm starting us off at 10, I'm gonna give it to Wild at Heart.
Veto. What the fuck?
That was veto. All right, well, if we're vetoing that, then
Wait. Can you
Wait,
pick
no.
something that you haven't seen?
Yeah, I was gonna say because there's one like obvious.
Come on.
Oh,
it's-
you're right.
Yeah.
Wait, sorry. Yeah, you're right. I'll change mine to Dune. You don't have to burn your veto. I wasn't.
Okay.
I'm looking at my
Thank
own
you,
list. And I
thank you.
haven't seen Dune, so it's not all mine. You're right. I haven't seen Dune. I'm gonna trust it's 10, so you don't have to burn your veto there.
Yeah, it is. Next for me, definitely Straight Story. I don't think there's gonna be any arguments with that, but yeah.
Yeah, that's fair.
Seth?
I'll go Inland Empire. I'll go Inland Empire. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly my ranking.
Mm.
Next,
Ryan?
I'll end up going Wild at Heart again.
That's my ranking.
Yeah, this is spot on my ranking
It's
so far.
literally exactly my ranking.
Next up, as much as I love it, I'm gonna go with Eraserhead.
This
This
is my
is
ranking.
this is my ranking.
This is my exact ranking.
I may change things up here, but next I'm going to go for the Elephant Man.
It's my ranking.
Mine as
Maybe,
well.
I'd have it higher, but I don't mind. It's only like 2 spots different. That's fine. I'll take that. Is it me? Yeah.
Yep.
I'll go. What are we now? Is it 3 or 4?
We're 4, I think.
I haven't seen Twin Peaks. I'm gonna get vetoed, but I'll go Mulholland Drive for 4.
I don't hate that. Oh, really?
Of course he's gonna veto it. I haven't seen it in a while though, so that's kind of the reason. I'll go. Yeah, I'll. So if I go if that's been vetoed, then I'll take Blue Velvet at 4.
Yeah, nice. Ryan?
Right, that was actually, or no, it was 4.
Which number is this? 3?
3, yeah.
Yeah, I have it in my third spot, but this is probably going to get vetoed. I'll go Lost Highway.
Veto. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. I'll go Fire Walk with Me then.
Okay.
I haven't seen that,
Nice.
so.
Back to me.
Alex?
I'll so what we have at 2. We have
Mulholland Drive, Lost Highway.
yeah. All right, I'll go Lost Highway then.
Veto.
Thank you. Perfect.
I can accept that. So obviously Mulholland Drive's going at 2, and Lost Highway will be R1.
I'm taking Lost Highway at 1.
Perfect.
I'm pretty sure that is my exact ranking.
It's almost mine.
It's almost mine. The bottom like 4 or 5 are, and I've lost out at 1. Just the 3 in the middle makes up a little bit. I think.
Yeah.
Much less controversial than our Fincher ranking.
Oh, our Fincher one was so funny. We had to
You see our
try
Fincher
not...
ranking?
No, I didn't. I don't think.
Yeah.
In fact, I saw it on Twitter, but I can't remember what it was now.
We had to stop Alex getting Mank like near number 1 because he loves that film.
Man.
I love Mank. It was pretty controversial.
He put The Killer at 9.
Where did it end up? He put The Killer at 9.
Mank ended up at 5.
Yeah, Mank ended up at 5.
Where was the killer?
9.
9th.
Oh man, I have the
And
killer
we did-
5th,
we-
and I have Mank like 10th or some shit. I don't.
We didn't veto it, only The Killer, only because we wanted to say because we knew he'd put Mank at like 2.
What was 1?
Social Network. Social
Yeah,
Network.
Social Network.
Yeah,
That's
was
my
the-
1. That's my 1. I'm happy with that. That's my 1.
Yeah.
At least that's not all bad.
All right, so that wraps up our episode on David Lynch, one of the best filmmakers still living today. Seth, why don't you tell everyone who's watching, where could they find you and your socials, all that?
You can find me at Seth's Film Reviews on TikTok, Seth's Reviews on Letterboxd, and then Seth's Film Reviews on Twitter, Instagram, but mainly Letterboxd. Find me on there. That's the most interesting, I'd say, anyway.
Well, thank you to Seth for coming on, and thank you all for watching, and tune in next week for another great episode. Take care.